Tonight's stories are calm and easy to listen to, told slowly beneath the sound of steady rain. There's a gentle darkness here, familiar and unhurried. Everything continues quietly if you drift off. Story 1, Silent Highway, the Phantom Roadblock. There's a way the highway breathes when you're hauling a rig through the middle of nowhere. Not the steady hum of tires on asphalt you'd expect, but something quieter, like the road is alive, patient, watching. I noticed it first around mile marker 47, just past the last gas station before the state line, where the trees lean in like old men whispering secrets. The sun was dipping low, catching fire in the clouds, and I was settling into the rhythm of my 18 wheels humming beneath me. It's a comfortable solitude, the kind you get used to after years on the road, the radio crackling low, the seat worn just right, the smell of stale coffee and leather mixing in the cab. I'd been driving since before dawn, moving freight from Kansas City to Salt Lake, and the night ahead promised a stretch of nothing but blacktop and pine. I flicked on the CB, mostly out of habit. Breaker, anyone around? Static. Then a burst, fast, urgent chatter I didn't catch all at once. Voices overlapping, some panicked, others clipped and warning, like truckers trying to spill the beans on something nobody wants to hear. Road closed up ahead. Total shutdown. Detours in effect past mile 50. Stay alert. Heavy blockage. No way through. I frowned, fingers tightening on the wheel. I've heard my share of road closures before, accidents, construction, the usual. But this felt different. The urgency in their voices wasn't just routine. It was raw. Like they'd seen something that made them want to turn tail and run. I checked my GPS. No alerts for closures. No reroutes. The satellite map showed a clear path. I shrugged it off at first. CB chatter can get dramatic, especially on lonely roads where boredom makes stories bigger than they are. Still, I kept the channel open, listening for updates. Minutes passed. The sun slipped lower, shadows stretching across the pavement, and the trucks around me thinned out. Then, somewhere around mile 49, the chatter picked up again, louder now, more frantic. Block in place. No access past the bridge. Turn back, I'm telling you. They're stopping everyone. No one's getting through. I blinked against the glare, scanning the road ahead. Nothing. Not a single sign of trouble. No flashing lights, no emergency vehicles, no cones or barriers. Just the crackling sound of flying through the pines, the faint hum of my rig's engine, and the endless stretch of asphalt. Curious, I pulled off at a small rest area just before the bridge. My boots hit the ground with a thud against cracked concrete, the scent of pine and damp earth thick in the cool air. I leaned against the side of my truck, rubbing the back of my neck, and watched cars and pickups pass by without slowing. Not one seemed bothered by what I just heard. I approached a silver sedan idling nearby. The driver, a man maybe my age with a sunburned face and tired eyes, rolled down his window. "You hear the chatter about the road ahead?" I asked. He shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement. "Nothing like that. Road's clear as day. Been driving this stretch all afternoon." His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Are you sure? There's been warnings all over the CB." I felt my voice tighten, the knot in my stomach growing. He shrugged. "Might be some prank or miscommunication. Happens sometimes." Then he peeled away, leaving a faint smell of burnt rubber and diesel. I stood there, the cold creeping into my bones as the sun dipped behind the trees, the shadows folding over the pavement like a blanket. The chatter on the CB continued, voices rising and falling in a frantic rhythm that made my skin crawl. But out here, in the fading light, the road was impossibly still, empty except for the occasional car that passed without a glance. I climbed back into the cab, the interior light flickering briefly before settling into a steady glow. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the radio, tuning between channels, searching for some confirmation, some clue. Nothing. I still can't explain it. Just static and faint voices too far away to understand. I took a deep breath, the stale air tasting like burnt coffee and exhaustion. Maybe I'm just tired, I muttered to myself. Probably nothing. But the feeling lingered, a quiet pulse beneath my skin, like something unseen was waiting just beyond the next bend. I pulled back onto the highway, the engine's low growl filling the silence. Mile marker 50 came and went. No barricades. No detours. No sign of the block in place the CB chatter had warned me about. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the side mirror, eyes wide, jaw tight. I rubbed my face, tasting the grit of the road dust mixed with the faint metallic tang of sweat. Then another vehicle approached, a dark pickup, windows tinted too heavily to see inside. The driver slowed as they passed, a flicker of something in their glance that didn't sit right. They didn't nod, didn't wave, just a look that felt like a warning. I swallowed hard. The road stretched ahead, endless and empty, but something was definitely off. I wanted to believe it was just a mix-up. A prank. My mind playing tricks after hours of monotony. But the voices on the radio kept coming, frantic and unrelenting, and the passing drivers insisted everything was fine, like they were all part of the same act. I switched off the CB, the silence inside the cab suddenly overwhelming. Outside, the night crept in, thick and suffocating. The highway waited, patient as ever. And I was the only one who seemed to hear the warning. The night didn't get any easier. I reached for the radio again, hoping maybe someone would say something clearer. Static at first, then a crackling voice, hurried and clipped. Road closed up ahead. No way through past mile marker 47. Turn back if you can. Then silence. No one else answered. Just that one warning, repeated twice before the channel fell dead. I cursed under my breath, the sound harsh in the quiet cab. Nothing looked out of place. The road was dry, the air cool but not cold, smelling faintly of pine and something acrid, maybe a distant campfire. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 11:37. Too late to turn around, too early to stop and rest. The mirror caught my eye again. My reflection was pale under the dash lights, eyes rimmed red, hair plastered to my forehead with sweat. I rubbed my face, tasting the grit again, but this time it felt sharper, almost metallic. I swallowed hard. Was I losing it? I thought about calling dispatch, but my phone had no signal out here. The truck's GPS blinked no data. I was cut off. Completely alone. The passing cars hadn't stopped either. Maybe they were just messing with me. Or maybe I was just paranoid. Yet every time I looked at the other drivers, their eyes slid away like they were hiding something. Like they knew something I didn't. I decided to pull over at the next rest stop, about 5 miles ahead. I needed to stretch my legs, clear my head, maybe find someone who would talk straight. The rest stop was a squat cluster of buildings tucked under the trees, half lit by harsh sodium lamps that flickered, throwing long shadows over cracked asphalt. The smell of diesel and old coffee hit me before I even opened the door. Inside, the place was almost deserted. A tired-looking clerk stood behind the counter, eyes barely lifting when I came in. "Evening," I said, my voice rough. "You know anything about the road ahead?" Heard some chatter on the radio about closures. He shrugged, polishing a chipped mug. "Road's fine. No closures. Been dragging this stretch for 20 years, never seen a problem." I pressed him. Traffic's been weird. Drivers acting like they're hiding something. He snorted. People get jumpy, especially at night. You're probably just tired. I wanted to argue, but the clerk's indifferent gaze shut me down. I left with a stale cup of coffee and a headache pounding behind my eyes. Outside, the night air felt heavier. The wind had picked up, rustling dry leaves and tossing the branches against the building with a hollow clatter. I leaned against my truck, taking deep breaths, trying to steady the tremor in my chest. Then I saw it, a pickup parked across the lot, engine idling low. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. The truck's lights flickered once, then went off. A slow blink, like a signal. I stared. No one got out. No movement. Just the sound of the engine, low and steady. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. Something about that pickup made my stomach coil tight. I made myself walk back inside, grabbing a map off the wall by the vending machines. It was old and faded, paper curling at the corners, but it showed the highway, mile markers, and side roads. I traced my finger along the route, stopping at mile marker 47. No detours marked. No warnings. Nothing. I flipped the map over, hoping to find a phone number or some emergency contacts. The only thing was a handwritten note stuck under the map frame. Stay on main road. Don't stop after dark. No signature, no date. I pocketed the note. That wasn't in the official pamphlets. Back in the cab, I dialed the dispatch number again, voice taut. Hey, this is Miller. I'm near mile marker 40. Got some weird chatter on the CB about road closures up ahead. You guys see anything? Static. Then a click. Negative, Miller. No reports of closures or hazards. You're clear. I frowned. Why would the radio say otherwise? I glanced at the mirror again, catching the faint reflection of movement behind the truck's window. A shadow. Just a quick flicker before it vanished. I shook my head. I was tired. Paranoid. But the feeling lingered. The next morning, sunlight spilled pale and weak through the cracked windshield. I hadn't slept much, too restless. I pulled over at the next town, a place called Red Pine, hoping to find a mechanic or someone who'd seen the traffic on the CB earlier. The diner at the edge of town smelled like burnt toast and strong coffee. Inside, a handful of locals sat at the counter, faces weathered, eyes wary. I took a seat beside an older man nursing a black coffee. His hands were knotted, veins like ropes. Morning, I said. You hear anything about the highway? Road closures or accidents? He looked up slowly, eyes sharp. Depends who you ask. What do you mean? He set the cup down, voice low. Some folks say the road's fine. Others say it's a trap. That people disappear out there. I blinked, surprised. Disappear? He nodded towards the window, where a gray pickup idled. Like that one. Comes through every few nights. Folks who drive past mile marker 47 don't come back. I glanced at the pickup. The driver's side window rolled down a fraction. A man's eyes met mine, cold and unreadable. I swallowed hard. The old man leaned closer. You're not the first to notice. But nobody talks much. Keeps the town quiet. Why? I asked. Fear, maybe. Or worse, what's out there waiting? I shook my head. There's nothing but road and trees. He smiled thinly, but there was no warmth in it. That's what they want you to think. I left the diner with a knot tightening in my chest. Was this some kind of joke? Or a warning? Back at the truck, I checked the CB again. Silence. The usual white noise. I was alone. And the road was watching. The truck hummed beneath me, tires rolling steady over the cracked asphalt as I pulled away from the diner. I flicked the CB on again, the static crackling louder than usual. But nothing. Just silence. The usual white noise, like the road itself was breathing, waiting. I adjusted the dial, hoping for a familiar voice. Anything. Instead, an uneasy quiet stretched on. I glanced at the fuel gauge. Half full. Enough to keep going, but not enough to turn back without stopping. The thought of heading back felt wrong. Like retreating into something worse. The road ahead seemed to pulse with possibility and dread all at once. I reached for the coffee cup from the diner, the warmth seeping into my cold fingers. It tasted bitter, burned at the edges, but it was the only thing that felt real. The night was thick, a low fog curled around the trees like fingers reaching out, blurring the edges of the world. The headlights cut through the mist, but barely. Every mile marker I passed felt like a countdown. I tried to make sense of the conflicting chatter. Some drivers on the CB insisted the road was clear, nothing to worry about. Others whispered about traps, disappearances, things that didn't make sense. I kept hearing about that pickup, the one that came through every few nights. Like some grim reaper, ferrying those who vanished. I pulled over briefly near a turnout, the gravel crunching under the tires. The night smelled of wet earth and pine sap, the air, cold and heavy with silence cold enough to sting my nostrils. I stepped outside, the quiet pressing in. No wind. No rustling leaves. Just the faint hum of distant insects and the occasional bark of a dog far off in the woods. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the tightness in my chest. The old man's warning echoed again. I wasn't sure if I wanted to believe him, but the pit in my gut said otherwise. Back in the cab, I flipped the CB dial through the channels one more time. A voice came through, low and hurried. Mile marker 47. Watch it. Don't trust the signs. They'll lie to you. My hands trembled on the wheel. Signs? What signs? I'd seen nothing out of place. No detours, no roadblocks. Everything was as normal as any lonely stretch of highway could be. I thought about turning around, but the thought felt like admitting defeat. Like swallowing some terrible truth I wasn't ready for. Maybe I was chasing shadows. Or maybe the road had already decided my fate. The pickup reappeared in my rearview mirror. The driver's eyes caught mine again, unblinking, unreadable. I felt the weight of that gaze settle over me. Like I was being sized up, measured, and found wanting. I tried to radio for help, for someone, anyone, but the static swallowed my words. A faint buzz came from the dashboard, flickering lights casting odd shadows across the cab's interior. The truck felt different now, smaller, claustrophobic. Like the walls were closing in. I forced myself to focus on the road ahead, but the highway twisted oddly, or maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. The mile markers came and went, but something was off. Distances felt stretched, the same trees appearing again and again. I caught myself gripping the wheel too tight, knuckles white. The CB crackled again. You can't leave now. Not after you see it. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing. See what? The voice was distorted, hurried, but there was a strange urgency beneath it. The kind that makes your skin crawl. I tried to ignore it, but the words echoed inside my head. Not after you see it. The road ahead bent sharply, a curve I wasn't expecting. I slowed, headlights sweeping over the shoulder where a figure stood, barely visible in the fog. A man, or was it a trick of the light? He didn't move, just watched. No signal, no gesture. Just watching. My heart slammed against my ribs. I wanted to press the gas, leave this place behind, but something rooted me to the spot. I blinked, and the figure was gone. The CB went dead again. Silence. Complete silence. I reached for my phone. No service. Of course. The isolation wrapped around me tighter than the fog. Suddenly, a pair of headlights appeared behind me, fast and bright. The truck's engine growled as I instinctively moved to the right shoulder. The vehicle slowed, then stopped a few yards behind. The driver's side window rolled down. Another man's eyes met mine, sharp and cold. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. I nodded, words caught in my throat. He leaned out, voice low but firm. "This road changes people. You might not want to leave when it's done with you." I swallowed, the heat of panic rising. "What do you mean?" He shook his head slowly. "Doesn't matter what I say. You're past the point of no return." The fog thickened, swallowing the truck and the man behind me. The headlights faded, leaving me alone with the creeping silence and the endless road stretching into darkness. I sat there for a long moment, the engine idling beneath me, the weight of his words settling in like a stone. No turning back. No escape. Just the road, watching. Waiting. And me, caught in its grip. A shiver ran down my spine as the cold night air seeped through the cracked window. Somewhere, distant headlights blinked, or was it just a trick of the dark? The fog didn't lift. I kept my hands on the wheel, knuckles white against the black rubber grip. The engine hummed low, a steady drone beneath the chill and quiet. The radio was dead, static buzzing through the speakers instead of the usual garbled chatter. No one was calling out anymore. No frantic warnings or cryptic messages. Just silence. It was that silence that got me first. Silence. Complete silence. I glanced in the rearview mirror. No headlights. No tail lights. Nothing. Like I'd been swallowed whole by the night and spit out into some place where time didn't exist. The only movement was the faint sway of the fog, drifting like smoke curling from a dying fire. My fingers trembled. Not with fear exactly, something sharper. Unease, maybe. The kind that crawls up your spine and lodges in your gut, twisting into knots you can't unkink. I told myself I was overthinking. I'd been driving long hours, maybe half asleep at the wheel. Could be the mileage playing tricks on me. But I knew better. After the man's warning, after every driver I'd passed or tried to pass who'd looked at me like I was an intruder in a place I wasn't meant to be, there was no mistaking it. This road was a trap. I started the engine again, eased the truck forward. The headlights carved a narrow path through the fog, illuminating nothing but the wet pavement and the occasional flash of road signs that flickered in and out of view like ghosts. Every mile felt longer, heavier. Then I saw it. Or thought I did. A figure, standing at the edge of the road ahead, just beyond the reach of my headlights. Maybe 50 yards out, motionless. The fog wrapped around the shape like a shroud. I blinked, and it was gone. Maybe a trick of the dim light that cast long, dancing shadows. Or the fog playing games. But I slowed down, heart clenching. If there was someone out there, I needed to be careful. I pulled off onto a gravel shoulder, the tires crunching against stones and dirt. The truck's cab fell into silence, the engine ticking as it cooled. The fog pressed in closer now, fingers of mist slipping beneath the door seals and curling around the tires. I leaned out the window, the cold night air biting at my skin and filling my nose with the sharp scent of damp earth and pine. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked, sharp, quick, then silence. The sound was so sudden and alone it made me jump. "Hello?" I called into the fog, voice rough from dryness. "Hey, is someone there?" My voice sounded small, swallowed up by the night. No answer. Just the soft rustle of wind and the distant bark again, this time fainter. I shut the window and locked the door. Every instinct told me to keep moving, but I needed to know what I was dealing with. I couldn't just drive blind into whatever this was. I checked the CB radio. Dead. Not even static. Like someone had pulled the plug on the entire frequency. The silence was suffocating. I sat back, rubbing my face with my hands. Sweat beaded at my hairline despite the cold. I thought of the drivers I'd met or thought I'd met who'd warned me to turn back. None of them made sense. They were too calm, too distant. Like they already belonged here, or were part of some unspoken agreement with the road. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by animals or ghosts, by people. Real ones. But who? And why? A sudden noise made me jump. A tapping on the truck's roof. Tap. 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 My head snapped upward, eyes wide. I stared into the foggy darkness above. Nothing. The tapping stopped. My heart hammered in my chest, loud enough to drown out the silence. I slammed the door and locked it again, sliding down in my seat. The truck felt suddenly smaller, like the walls were closing in. Then the radio crackled. Static first, then a voice, low and urgent. "Turn back. Turn back now. Don't trust the road." I grabbed a mic, fingers shaking. Who is this? What's going on? Silence. Then another voice, different, colder, cut through the static. "You can't leave. Not now. Not ever." The radio died. I dropped the mic, breathing hard. The cab was thick with tension, the cold seeping into my bones. I thought about my options. Keep driving and risk whatever was out there. Stay put and wait for daylight, hoping the fog would lift and the road would clear. Or try to find a place to pull over, maybe a rest stop or gas station, and figure out what was happening. But deep down, I knew there was no escape. No safe haven. The road had me. I started the engine again, heart sinking as the headlights pierced the fog once more. The tunnel of mist stretched ahead, endless and unyielding. Then, out of nowhere, headlights appeared behind me, close and fast. A car, tailgating the truck, bright beams burning through the fog. I checked the mirrors. It wasn't just one car. A line of them, all pressed close. Their drivers stared at me with blank faces, eyes too sharp, too cold. I hit the horn. A long blast. No reaction. The cars kept pace. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. I switched on the hazard lights, flashing them wildly. Maybe they'd back off. Maybe they'd see I wasn't a threat. No luck. The line of headlights was relentless. I thought about pulling over, letting them pass. But where? The shoulder was narrow, and the fog made everything look like a wall. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of asphalt swallowed by white. I swallowed hard. I was trapped. This wasn't about a broken-down road or a detour. It was something else. Something darker. The drivers behind me weren't just warning me anymore. They were hurting me. I slowed down, trying to keep steady. The truck's engine protested, but I eased into a crawl. The cars behind matched my pace, unblinking, unyielding. I glanced at the mirrors again. Faces pressed close to windows, pale and unreadable. Then, the radio crackled once more. This road doesn't forgive. It changes you. Don't let it win. The voice was almost a whisper, like a breath on my ear. I reached for the mic again, but my fingers froze. What else could I say? What could I do? The fog thickened, swallowing the headlights, the cars, the road ahead. And in the rearview mirror, I saw the man from before, standing by the side of the road, watching. No sign of fear. Just that same cold certainty. The road was waiting. And I was running out of time. I parked the rig at the rest stop on the east side of Highway 87, the one with the cracked concrete and that faded wooden sign swinging in the wind. The sun was dipping lower, washing everything in a tired orange that made the distant hills look hollow and tired, like they'd been drained of color. I shut off the engine, and almost immediately the silence pressed in, thick and heavy. No hum of tires, no chatter on the CB, just the occasional creak of the sign's chains and a bird's lazy call somewhere out past the trees. I rubbed my hands on my jeans, the fabric rough and worn, trying to shake the numbness that had settled in my fingers all day. The warnings on the CB, frantic, urgent voices cutting through the static, still rang in my ears. Roads closed up ahead. Don't go. Turn back. Something's wrong. Words repeated like a mantra. But every time I checked the road, it was wide open. Just me, the asphalt stretching smooth and empty, and the occasional passing car that waved or smiled, insisting nothing was wrong. That was the thing. Everyone I met acted like I was the crazy one. Like the warnings were just my imagination running wild. When I tried to explain, they'd shake their heads or chuckle, offering small talk about the weather or the traffic. No roadblocks, no accidents, no reason to turn around. I thought maybe it was exhaustion messing with me. A long haul, low sleep, and too much static in my ears. But deep down, I knew something else was going on. I just didn't have the pieces yet. I stayed at the rest stop longer than I planned, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air turned cooler, carrying the sharp scent of pine and damp earth. It smelled like rain, or maybe just the promise of it. The wind tugged at the loose edges of my jacket, and the faint sound of a dog barking far off made me think of home, of my old dog, Max, who'd been waiting for me the last few years. I pulled my phone out, hoping for a better signal than I'd gotten all day. Nothing. Just the spinning circle of death and that annoying no-service message. Typical. That stretch of road was a dead zone for most things besides radio chatter. I flipped the CB back on, half expecting silence. But there it was again, a voice, cut sharp through the static, urgent as ever. Turn around. Not safe. Not safe. The words made my skin prickle, but I swallowed the lump in my throat and keyed the mic. Who's this? What's going on out there? My voice was rough, the dryness in my throat making it catch. No reply. A long pause. Then the same voice, low and ragged. They're watching. Don't trust the road. Don't trust the drivers. I froze. The engine idling beside me seemed too loud. My heart thudded, heavy in my chest. I blinked, trying to focus. Watching. Who's watching? What do you mean? Static. Then silence. I killed the CB and leaned back in the seat, the vinyl sticking to my shirt. The quiet was almost unbearable. I needed to move, but where? Each direction felt like a trap. Every time I tried to follow the warnings, The roads were clear. Every person I met denied anything was wrong. It was as if I was caught in some invisible cage. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe slow. The day's tension was building up, coiling tight in my chest. I thought about my wife, about the last call I'd made to her before I hit the road this morning. She'd sounded tired but hopeful, like she always did when I was away. I pictured her sitting by the window, waiting, the light behind her casting shadows on the wall. I needed to get out of this loop. I needed answers. And maybe, just maybe, I could find them if I stopped running from the fear and started facing it. I stepped out of the truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. The air felt colder now, the wind sharper. I walked toward the edge of the rest stop, where the trees began, their dark shapes looming against the twilight sky. The smell of pine needles and damp leaves filled my nose, grounding me. I could hear a car approaching on the highway, a soft hum growing louder. I stepped back onto the road as it passed, the driver giving me a quick nod. I raised my hand, hesitating. "Hey," I called out. "Did you hear the warnings? About the road ahead?" The car slowed, then stopped a few yards away. The window rolled down, and a man's face appeared, weathered and tired. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, voice calm but firm. "Road's fine. Nothing's wrong." I swallowed hard, the frustration bubbling up again. "People on the CB said." "People say a lot of things," he interrupted. "Best not to listen to rumors." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Have you seen anything strange? Anyone acting weird?" He shook his head. "Just folks minding their own business. That's all." The car pulled away, tires humming on the asphalt. I was alone again, the fading light swallowing the world around me. I turned back to the truck, the weight of the day settling in my bones. I climbed inside, closed the door, and sat there for a long time. The dashboard lights cast a soft glow, illuminating the dust motes in the air. Outside, the night crept in, cool and silent. Then, something shifted. The CB crackled one last time. A voice, softer now, almost a whisper. "You're not alone." I froze, fingers tightening on the steering wheel. The words weren't a threat. Not exactly. They were a warning. An invitation. A reminder that whatever this was, it wasn't just in my head. I thought about the empty roads, the smiling drivers, the invisible maze I'd been trapped in. Maybe some dangers don't show themselves with flashing lights or roadblocks. Maybe the real monsters are the ones hiding behind polite smiles and calm voices. I switched the CB off. The silence returned, but it didn't feel so heavy anymore. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, the headlights cutting through the darkness. As I drove, the tension inside me loosened just a bit. I couldn't explain what had happened. Maybe I never would. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't the same man who'd started this trip. I'd been tested, twisted by fear and doubt, and I'd come out the other side. Not unscathed, but alive. Wiser, maybe. More cautious. And maybe, just maybe, ready to face whatever came next. The mile stretched out before me, empty and open now. The road was clear. The warnings gone silent. But I kept my eyes wide open. And I kept driving. Story 2, Room 7's Forgotten Tenant, Haunting Secrets Unveiled. The city had that dull, tired smell that always settled in just before dusk, like exhaust fumes mixed with something faintly acrid, maybe burnt coffee or overcooked toast. I dropped my bag on the floor, the zipper scraping against the rough carpet that had seen better decades. It was the kind of carpet that felt like a poor substitute for a floor, worn thin and patched with stains that suggested long, neglected histories. I rubbed my hands together, trying to shake off the sticky humidity clinging to my skin. Summer in this part of town wasn't kind. I could already tell that. The room was small. One bed pushed against the wall, a rickety desk with a lamp that flickered weakly, and a dresser with 3 drawers. The wallpaper peeled in one corner, curling like dead leaves. Not much else. I had booked the place last minute, under a name I barely recognized, and was grateful for a bed rather than the alternative, my car, parked too far away to be comfortable. I flipped on the cheap overhead light. That buzzing hum filled the silence, which was welcome and unwelcome at the same time. Silence. Complete silence. After setting up my laptop on the desk, I was about to collapse onto the bed when something caught my eye, a thin envelope tucked beneath the dresser. Odd. I'd already checked the room twice for anything left behind. I knelt and pulled it out. The paper was yellowed and cracked at the edges, the kind of thing you'd expect from a letter found in an old book, not a hotel room. Inside, I found a driver's license. The photo showed a man in his late 30s, eyes piercing and serious. The name was Daniel Mercer. I didn't recognize it. The ID expired 2 years ago. Odd again. I flipped the card over, then noticed something else pressed beneath it, a small, leather-bound notebook, its cover scuffed and worn. Curiosity took over. I opened the notebook carefully, as if it might shatter. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting, dense and uneven. The first entry was dated almost a month ago. I skimmed the words, my eyes slowing as I read. Day 1. The room feels different tonight. I'm not alone. I blinked. I read it again, slower this time. I'm not alone. A shiver crept up my spine. I looked around the room, suddenly aware of how close the walls seemed. The breeze from the window no longer felt refreshing but intrusive, as though it carried whispers meant only for someone else. I closed the notebook and sat back on the bed, trying to dismiss the growing knot of unease. It was probably a prank left by some previous guest. Or maybe Daniel Mercer had just forgotten his things. I told myself I was overthinking. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The room, the diary, the ID, it was like a puzzle missing half its pieces, and I was staring at the wrong side. I tried calling the front desk but got a voicemail. The receptionist's voice was too cheery to be real, like it was recorded years ago and left on loop. I left a message but didn't expect a callback. Later, while unpacking, I noticed the bathroom door wasn't quite shut. It was ajar by an inch, just enough to catch my eye. I hadn't used the bathroom yet. I pushed the door open slowly. The tile floor was cold and the mirror fogged from humidity, but nothing seemed out of place. No sign of recent use. No footprints on the floor. Yet the hairdryer was plugged in. I stared at it, fingers twitching. Why leave that on? I unplugged it and stuffed it into the cabinet. Then I noticed a faint smell, not the usual bleach or soap, something musty, like damp fabric left too long in a drawer. Back in the main room, I flicked on the desk lamp again. The flicker was worse now, strobing in a rhythm that made my head throb. I leaned close to the notebook, flipping to another entry. Day 12. Heard voices through the wall. Not sure if I'm losing it or someone's really there. They don't know I'm awake. My breath caught. Voices? Walls? I pressed my ear to the peeling wallpaper near the dresser. Silence. Then a muffled thump. Maybe the old building settling. Maybe not. I pulled my phone out and checked the room number on the booking app, 512. I looked at the door again, noticing the lock was the old slide bolt type, scratched and worn. The key looked like it had been copied 100 times over. I paced the room, hands clasped behind my back. I tried to imagine who Daniel Mercer was. The diary hinted at someone trapped or hiding. Was he still here? Or had he left and someone else moved in? The thought made my skin crawl. I sat down again, notebook in hand, the pen resting on my knee. The entries grew more frantic toward the end. Day 28. They're watching. Always watching. I hear footsteps outside the door even when no one should be here. I don't know what they want. I closed the book and stared out the window. The street below was bathed in the orange glow of streetlights. People passed by in small groups, laughing, talking. Life carried on as usual. But not here. I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, like someone was standing just behind me. I turned quickly. Nothing. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner kicking in, uneven and rattling. I told myself to get a good night's sleep, that tomorrow I would check out early and find another place. But even as I rolled over, the unease lingered. The sense that the room wasn't entirely mine. That someone else was still here, still watching. And maybe had been all along. The night stretched on, thick and quiet except for the steady hum of the air, cold and heavy with silence conditioner and the occasional creak of the building settling around me. Eventually, the clock's steady ticking became a metronome to my restless mind. I sat up and flicked on the bedside lamp, its harsh light flooding the room with an uncomfortable clarity. The shadows fled, but the unease stayed. I pulled the diary back out, spine cracked and pages dog-eared, and flipped to the earlier entries. The entries before the chaos seemed almost normal, mundane, even a list of daily routines, observations about the city, weather notes. But the tone shifted gradually, like a slow drip of cold water. The writer started mentioning noises, things out of place, the feeling of being followed. Day 14. Someone was in the hallway. Heard the floorboards creak an hour after midnight. No one checked in on this floor for days. The handwriting was shaky here, ink smudged as if the pen had been dragged too fast, nerves getting the better of the writer. I frowned. That meant the previous occupant had noticed something wrong long before I did. The thought tightened my chest. If this person had been here, in this room, for weeks, maybe even longer, where had they gone? Or had they ever left at all? I glanced around the room. The furniture looked untouched, but I knew better. There had to be a place, a space, a secret somewhere in these four walls. Not a hidden door or a trapdoor like the movies, but something smaller, less obvious. A vent, a crawl space, a panel maybe. I stood and moved toward the bathroom, the tiles cold under my bare feet. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something metallic, maybe rust from old pipes, but I caught a whiff of something else, too, faintly musty, like damp fabric or old paper. I crouched and peered behind the toilet. Nothing. Then I checked the closet, running my fingers over the backs of the hanging clothes, the baseboard, the wall corners. The wallpaper was peeling slightly near the window, edges curling like the pages of a neglected book. I reached out and touched it. The plaster underneath felt rough, uneven. A patch seemed newer than the rest, a different shade of white beneath the faded floral pattern. That caught my attention. I eased the wallpaper back, careful not to tear it too much, and uncovered a small rectangle of drywall that didn't quite match the surrounding wall. I pressed my fingers around the edges. It wasn't loose, but it gave a little under pressure. Heart quickening, I looked around for something to pry it open with my key card, the end of a pen, but hesitated. What was I hoping to find? Another diary? A hiding place? Or a trap? I stepped back, breathing uneven. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in with secrets. I forced myself to calm down, reminding myself this was just a room, 4 walls, a bed, a bathroom. Nothing more. But the feeling of being watched, the diary's words, they weren't just in my head. They were real. Someone had been here, maybe still was. Morning came reluctantly. The sky was a dull gray, the kind that made everything feel flat and muted. I didn't sleep well, but I forced myself out of bed and went down to the lobby. The receptionist, a woman named Carla, was arranging brochures behind the desk when I approached. "Good morning," I said, my voice a little rough. "Morning. Staying another night?" She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I hesitated. "Actually, I found something in my room. A diary. And an ID that doesn't belong to anyone I checked in with." Her smile tightened. "Oh, that's odd. Yeah. Do you know who the last guest was? The person named in the ID?" She glanced up and down the hallway, tearful or maybe nervous. "Room 312 had a guest who left a few days ago, a writer. Name was... I can't quite recall." "You can't recall?" I pressed. "You know, because I found their stuff still in the room." Carla swallowed. "Look, I'm not supposed to talk about guests' business. But maybe it's best if you don't poke around too much. Sometimes people have reasons for keeping things quiet." I nodded slowly, sensing there was more to this than she was letting on. "Do you know if anyone else has been in that room recently? Or if maintenance has done any work there?" "No work," she said quickly, eyes darting. "And as far as I know, no one else has been in there." I thanked her and left, the chill of suspicion settling deeper inside me. Back in the room, I tried to shake off the feeling that eyes were following me from behind the curtains or the vents. I checked the diary again, this time scanning for addresses, names, anything that could lead me to find this writer or whoever had been living here. Near the back, I found a scribbled note: "If you find this, be careful. They're not just watching, they're controlling. They know what I do, or I go. They even know when I'm asleep." That line hit me like a slap. Who was they? Someone with access to the building? A tenant? Or worse, someone who had been hiding here all along, using this room as a base? I made a plan. I would check the building's security cameras, ask the staff about any strange visitors, and maybe if I could sneak a peek at the adjacent rooms. If someone had been living here in secret, there had to be signs, discarded food containers, clothes, anything. I sat on the edge of the bed, tired but wired, and pulled out my phone. The battery was low, but I had enough time to call the front desk. Carla answered, her voice polite but tight. Could I see footage from the hallway outside room 312? Just curious about the last few days. Maybe I left something in the corridor? There was a pause long enough to make me wonder if she was weighing the risks of saying no. I'll have to ask the manager, she finally said. Please, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. It's important to me. All right, she replied, but I can't promise anything. I hung up, a knot tightening in my stomach. This was bigger than I thought. The diary, the ID, the strange patch on the wall, it all pointed to someone who had slipped through the cracks, hidden in plain sight. Hours later, Carla called back. Manager says you can come down to review the footage, but only with me present. I agreed immediately. The hotel security room was cramped, filled with screens and blinking lights. Carla sat beside me, her fingers tapping nervously on the desk. Here, she said, pointing to one monitor. This is the hallway outside 312. We watched. For hours, really. Footsteps, shadows passing by, cleaning staff pushing carts. Nothing out of the ordinary at first. Who is that? I whispered. Carla shook her head. No idea. I don't remember seeing anyone check in dressed like that. I rewound the footage, watching the figure disappear behind the door. Minutes later, the door cracked open and a hand slipped out, pulling something small and wrapped in cloth. My heart thudded. Someone was still here, living in my room, watching me. I looked at Carla, who avoided my gaze. We have to tell someone, I said, voice barely steady. She nodded slowly, but the hesitation in her eyes told me this was far from simple. The hotel had secrets, and I was right in the middle of them. The air in the security room felt thick, charged with something unspoken. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was a target. And the real story was just beginning. The screens flickered in front of me, cold little windows into the hallway outside room 312. Carla's tapping slowed, then stopped altogether. The hum of the security monitors filled the cramped room like a low drone. Outside, footsteps echoed faintly, someone passing by, maybe the night clerk or a guest returning late. Nothing unusual. At least, nothing at first. I squinted at the timestamp in the corner, 3:17 a.m. The corridor was empty except for a cleaning cart pushed by a tired night janitor. Then, at 3:42, a shadow slipped past the camera's edge. Too quick to be a guest making a late return. Someone familiar with the camera angles, someone who knew when they could move unseen. My throat tightened. Pause it there, I whispered. Carla froze the frame. The figure was too blurry to make out a face, but the posture, the way they moved, felt deliberate, cautious. Like they didn't want to be noticed. My fingers twitched, resting on the edge of the desk. Could that be the person who never checked out? I asked. Carla shrugged, eyes flicking nervously to the door. I don't know. The manager said there's no record of anyone staying beyond their checkout date. But something's off. I don't like this, she said quietly. Neither did I. The more I watched, the more I realized the footage was just a sliver of the story, the part the hotel wanted visible. What about the spaces between those moments? The gaps where the cameras blinked off or where the angle left blind spots. That's where the truth hid. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was a trespasser in someone else's hidden world. I left the security room feeling the weight of that. The stale air smelled like burnt coffee and old vinyl. My skin prickled, cold despite the summer heat pressing against the windows. Carla walked me to the elevator, her gaze darting over her shoulder every few seconds. Look, she said, voice low, I'm going to be honest. You should think about getting out of here. This isn't normal. Whoever was in your room, whoever's been watching you, it's not just some prank or mistake. I nodded, but inside, the knot in my stomach tightened. Escape wasn't that simple. The diary I'd found, it wasn't just a collection of ramblings. It was a map. A record of someone's entire existence, scribbled in margins, folded pages, and hurried scrawls. The last entries were desperate, paranoid. They talked about being trapped. About silence that wasn't silence at all. Back in my room, I dropped my bag on the bed. The musty scent of old paper and faint cologne lingered in the air. I ran my fingers over the diary's cover, rough and worn. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I froze before opening it. You shouldn't be here. No signature. Just those 4 words. The screen glowed too brightly in the dark. I swallowed hard. The walls seemed to close in, the air thickening around me. I paced the room, heart drumming against my ribs. The window was shut tight, but a single curtain fluttered slightly, stirred by the faintest draft. Outside, the city pulsed with distant sirens and the occasional bark of a dog. Life continued, unaware of the silent watcher inside my room. I tried calling Carla but went straight to voicemail. No surprise there. I flipped through the diary again, searching for anything I'd missed. Then I saw it, a folded piece of paper tucked between the last pages. I unfolded it carefully. On it, a crudely drawn floor plan of the hotel, with a series of items pointing to a small, unlabeled space behind the linen closet on my floor. A hidden room. My pulse quickened. I shoved the diary and the note into my jacket pocket and grabbed my phone. If there was a secret room, if someone had been living here all along, I needed to find it. But just as I stood up, the lights flickered, the hallway outside dimmed briefly, then brightened again. A subtle, but unmistakable sign that I wasn't alone. I stepped into the corridor, the worn carpet muffling my footsteps. The hotel was quieter now, the usual hum of activity replaced by the low breathing of a building settling for the night. I moved toward the linen closet, heart banging, fingers itching to pull back the shelves. The closet door resisted slightly, its paint chipped and peeling. Inside, the scent of bleach and fabric softener mixed with something else, metallic, sharp, like old rust or dried blood, but I wasn't sure. My breath hitched. Behind the shelves, the wall seemed thicker than it should be. I pressed my hand against it, feeling faint vibrations, like muffled voices just beyond. A soft click echoed from the far end of the hallway. I froze, listening. The sound of footsteps, deliberate, slow. Someone was coming. I backed away, the diary clutched tight. The door to 312 was just a few feet away, but every step felt heavier, as if the floor itself was trying to hold me back. My mind spun with questions. Was the watcher still here? Had they been the ones sending the message? And if they were, what did they want? The footsteps grew louder, closer. I ducked behind a corner, barely daring to breathe. The hallway stretched empty for a moment, then a shadow passed. Not through the camera this time. Right in front of me. Tall, thin, silent. I wanted to call out, to ask who they were, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure stopped just long enough to glance my way, then slipped into the stairwell. I exhaled, slow and steady. Whatever this was, it had crossed the line from mystery to menace. There was no turning back now. I was part of something far bigger than a lost ID or a forgotten diary. That hidden room wasn't just a secret, it was a trap. And I was the bait. Outside, the night deepened. The city's pulse slowed to a distant beat, but inside the hotel, something had woken. I had to find the truth. But more than that, I had to survive long enough to tell it. The stairwell door clicked shut behind the shadow. I didn't move. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb overhead. Its light stuttered like a dying heartbeat, throwing uneven shadows on the peeling paint and cracked tiles. The air smelled stale, thick with the scent of old carpet and something faintly metallic like rusted pipes leaking into the damp air. I swallowed hard, tasting the dryness in my mouth. This wasn't just a building. It was a cage. I should have run then. I should have bolted out the front door, called the police, and never looked back. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped forward, careful not to make a sound. The diary burned a hole in my pocket, its leather cover rough against my palm. Whoever had written it wasn't just a guest. They were trapped here, like me. Or worse, like prey. The shadow had gone into the stairwell, the one that spiraled up to the rooftop and down to the basement. I debated. Upstairs or downstairs? I needed answers, but every instinct screamed danger. Still, I had to choose. I headed down. The stairs creaked under my weight, the sound echoing off the concrete walls like a warning. My fingers hovered over the railing, cold and clammy. At the bottom, the air grew colder, damper. I squinted through the dimness. The basement was a maze of pipes and storage crates, the kind of place people avoid after dark. I caught a faint movement, a shadow flickering near one of the storage rooms. My heart hammered in my chest. I swallowed again, tasting the metallic tang of adrenaline. Cautiously, I edged closer. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with a trembling hand. Inside, the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay, was small, cluttered with forgotten furniture and boxes. A single dusty window high up let in a thin sliver of moonlight. And then I saw it, a makeshift bed in the corner, rumpled sheets, a worn jacket draped over a chair. Someone had been living here. My pulse spiked. I scanned the room for anything else, a note, a clue, a sign. My eyes landed on a crumpled photograph pinned to the wall. A man and a woman, smiling in front of a faded diner. On the back, a scrawled note, waiting. Not forever, but long enough. I shivered, the words echoing in my mind. Waiting for what? For whom? A sudden noise, a soft shuffle behind me. I spun around, heart in my throat. Nobody. Just a rat, darting across the floor and disappearing into a crack. I exhaled shakily, trying to steady my nerves. Then I heard a voice, low and deliberate, right behind me. You shouldn't be here. I froze. The voice was close, calm but cold, like ice sliding over glass. I didn't turn. Instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to speak. Who are you? No answer. Just the faint sound of footsteps retreating back into the shadows. I wanted to chase, to demand answers, but my legs refused. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The ID I found, the diary, the hidden room, this person had been here, watching, waiting, maybe even hiding. But why? Back upstairs, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, the diary still clutched tight. My hands trembled, the pages whispering secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The entries spoke of loneliness, fear, and a growing obsession with someone who never noticed the watcher's presence. A story of desperation disguised as devotion. Suddenly, the hotel phone rang, sharp and unexpected. I jumped, nearly dropping the diary. The line crackled. Did you find it? The voice was distorted, but unmistakably cold. Who is this? I stammered, heart pounding. Keep looking. You're closer than you think. The line went dead. I sat down hard on the bed, the weight of everything pressing down like a stone. Was this person playing a game? Testing me? Or warning me? The diary's final entries spoke of a breaking point, a moment when the watcher would step out from the shadows. I realized then that moment was now. I wasn't just a visitor anymore. I was part of this place's dark story, trapped in a web I didn't understand. Outside, the city lights flickered and dimmed, the night deepening into something colder, more unforgiving. The watcher was still here. Watching. Waiting. And I had no idea how to stop it. A sudden chill ran down my spine as the air thickened around me. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wine through the cracked window felt like a signal. My pulse quickened, heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of unseen footsteps. The diary was heavy in my hands, its pages seeming to pulse with a life of their own, as if the words were bleeding into reality. I needed to move, to break free from this suffocating silence, but my body felt rooted, paralyzed by an unseen force. Then, A faint glow appeared in the corner of the room, a flicker of light that wasn't from the city outside. It danced and shimmered, casting long shadows that writhed and twisted on the walls. The Watcher was no longer just an idea. It was here, tangible, a presence that filled the room with dread and anticipation. I swallowed hard, trying to muster the courage to face whatever was coming next. My fingers tightened around the diary, knowing that the answers, if any existed, were hidden within those cursed pages. The night was far from over, and so was the game. I stayed awake most of the night, my eyes trained on the dark corners of the room where the shadows crowded and shifted. The faintest sounds, creaks, distant footsteps, the soft scrape of something sliding, kept me alert until the first thin light of dawn crept through the cracked blinds. The hotel room no longer felt like a temporary stopover. It was a cage. I realized I hadn't really grasped the depth of that fact until then. The diary, folded carefully beneath the loose floorboard, had been both a revelation and a chain. I reread the entries in a trembling haze, each word a thread pulling me deeper into the mind of the stranger I'd never met but had somehow invited into my life. He'd stayed here, watching and waiting in silence, his life entwined with this room in ways I hadn't imagined. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before my arrival, and it stopped abruptly, mid-sentence, as if something had yanked the pen away. I sat on the edge of the bed, the thin mattress creaking beneath me. The scent of stale cigarette smoke and cheap detergent hung thick in the air, mingling with the faintest hint of something metallic, maybe the remnants of old blood, though I wasn't sure. I tried to shake the image from my mind. Not helpful. Not now. By mid-morning, I knew I had to leave. But the thought of walking out that door, back into a world that didn't know what had happened here, felt equally impossible. The hotel lobby was deserted when I checked out. The clerk barely glanced up, offering a distracted "have a nice day," as though no one ever stayed long enough to notice what happened behind the faded wallpaper and cracked paint. I left the key on the counter, along with a note. Someone else lived here. Someone watching. I'm gone. No name, no explanation. The words felt pitiful and inadequate, but it was the best I could do. Outside, the city was waking up. The air smelled of wet asphalt and roasted coffee beans from a nearby cafe. The buzz of traffic mixed with the distant bark of a dog and the early chatter of pedestrians. Life moved on, indifferent to the secrets buried in room 407. I walked without direction, my feet leading me away from the hotel and the weight of the diary. The pages had shown me the stranger's world, his loneliness, his obsession, his fear, and I knew I couldn't carry that with me any longer. The diary was a ghost I didn't want haunting me. Still, part of me wondered about the other occupant. If someone had been hiding here, watching, waiting, what had they wanted? Why hadn't I seen them? The thought twisted in my stomach, a slow, gnawing ache. I realized I'd been lucky. Or unlucky, depending on how you looked at it. The room had its secrets, but not its killers. Not yet. Later that day, I found myself in a small park, sitting on a weathered bench beneath a gnarled oak tree. The bark was rough under my fingertips, grounding me. I pulled the diary from my bag one last time, flipping through the pages with a sense of finality. The stranger's handwriting was shaky, sometimes desperate. His words painted a portrait of a man unraveling in isolation. I read aloud quietly, as if the act might exorcise the lingering unease. I don't know how much longer I can stay hidden. Every sound feels like a warning. Every shadow, a threat. But I can't leave, not yet. The voice I heard was fragile, cracked. And somewhere beneath the fear, a thread of hope. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappling the pages. The world here was different, lighter, breathing. And I realized I'd been holding my breath for far too long. I didn't return to the hotel. Instead, I called the front desk from a cafe down the street, insisting they check room 407 thoroughly. They promised to send someone immediately. I left the diary's location vague, worried about what might happen if the wrong hands found it. Sometimes, knowledge felt like a burden too heavy to bear. The days that followed were a strange mix of relief and apprehension. The hotel called once to thank me for the tip and say they found evidence of someone living in the walls, makeshift bedding, discarded food containers, faint footprints in the dust. They assured me the police had been involved, that the place was secure now. I wanted to believe them. But every night, when the city's noise died down and silence settled in like a thick fog, I'd feel the weight of unseen eyes again. Not watching me, not exactly, but waiting. Lurking just beyond the edge of perception. Maybe that was the true horror, not the stranger in the diary or the secret tenant, but the way fear burrows into you, reshaping what you thought was safe. I started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. Not to solve mysteries or chase ghosts, but to make sense of my own tangled thoughts. Words poured out, slow and deliberate, a way to reclaim my mind from the darkness the hotel had left behind. One evening, as I closed my notebook, I noticed sunlight slipping through the window, casting long shadows on the floor. The room smelled faintly of pine and rain, fresh, clean. I breathed it in deeply. I was home again, in my own space, my own life. I thought about the stranger in room 407. About the hidden tenant who had vanished as quietly as they'd appeared. And about myself, standing at the edge of something I hadn't expected to survive. The fear hadn't disappeared entirely. It never would. But it no longer ruled me. I looked outside, watching the world unfold, people laughing in the park, children chasing pigeons, a breeze stirring the leaves. The shadows were still there, but they were just shadows now. No longer threats. Just shapes, waiting to be understood. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could finally put the past behind me. Turn the page. The hotel was nothing more than a memory now, a chapter closed with a trembling hand and a steady heart. I didn't know what I'd do next. Maybe nothing spectacular, maybe everything ordinary. But I knew this, I was still here. Still standing. Still breathing. And sometimes, that's enough. Story 3, The Mimic Hospital, Voices That Deceive. The first time I heard her voice, I was halfway down the corridor, the dull hum of fluorescent lights overhead pressing on my skin like a low-grade headache. "Hey, Mark," the voice said, soft and clear but just out of reach. I stopped. My throat tightened, and I glanced around. The hospital wing was empty. No nurses, no patients, no visitors. Just the dim, flickering hallway lined with closed doors and the occasional sputtering light above a nurse's station. "Mark," the voice said again. I swallowed. It was Sarah's voice, my friend Sarah, the one who'd been discharged last week after her surgery. Or at least I thought it was her. I stepped closer to the room the voice seemed to come from, a patient room at the end of the hall. The door was shut tight, a small window clouded with dust and smudges. I pressed my ear to it, but there was nothing, just the faint, mechanical thrum of a ventilation system somewhere deep behind the walls. I shook my head and backed away. "Must be imagining things," I muttered, though my voice sounded small, swallowed by the vast empty silence around me. I'd been working the night shift at St. Vincent's for 3 months now. Hospital security, mostly routine patrols and check-ins, nothing more than making sure wandering patients didn't get lost or stumble into restricted areas. Usually, it was boring, too boring. I liked it that way. Familiar faces in the day, the occasional late-night ambulance wail in the distance, and then long stretches of nothing. But that night, something felt off. The hallway lights flickered again, a slow, uneven stroke that made the shadows dance like they had a life of their own. I rubbed my eyes. "Mark." The voice was louder now, urgent but still Sarah's. I turned sharply, heart thudding hard enough to make my ears ring. The corridor behind me was empty. I told myself maybe someone was playing a prank. Hospital workers sometimes did that to break the monotony. But there was no one around. A cold draft brushed past my neck. I pulled my jacket tighter and moved on, telling myself I was overthinking it. The nurse's station was deserted except for a half-empty coffee cup and a crumpled newspaper dated 3 days ago. I ran my fingers over the rough plaster wall, feeling the grit beneath my skin. The hospital smelled different here, less sterile, more like it hadn't been cleaned properly in a while. I was supposed to check on room 312 next, an empty ward that had been closed off for renovations. The door was supposed to be locked. But when I reached it, the handle was warm in my palm. Warm. That shouldn't be possible. I glanced down the hall. No one. Not a single soul. I pulled the door open an inch. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of a phone screen lying on the bedside table. The screen showed a paused video, a man speaking, but the sound was off. The air inside the room was thick, stale, and smelled faintly of burnt plastic. I stepped back quickly. "Mark," the voice whispered again, barely audible this time, like it was coming from underwater. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. My hands trembled, and a bead of sweat rolled down my temple despite the chill in the air. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the acoustics. The hospital was old and labyrinthine, with vents and pipes that could carry sound in strange ways. Maybe, just maybe, it was someone else calling to me from somewhere else entirely. But Sarah's voice. I knew it well enough to be sure. Later, in the security office, I replayed the audio from the hallway cameras. Nothing unusual. No one walking near room 312. No one calling out. Just me, pacing and staring at a locked door. I told the night nurse, Mrs. Callahan, about it the next morning. Her eyes narrowed, and she gave me a look that said she didn't believe a word. "Old buildings play tricks on your head," she said, tapping her pen against the counter. "Maybe you're just tired." Maybe she was right. But when I left the hospital that day, I caught a glimpse of someone down the corridor, half hidden in the shadows with a pale face and dark eyes that didn't quite belong in a place like this. They vanished before I could blink, leaving only the faint scent of burnt plastic lingering in the stale air. I told myself to forget it, to push it away like the unsettling hum of the fluorescent lights. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting. And somewhere in the maze of empty rooms, my friends were still calling. I moved forward, each step echoing louder than the last, my breath shallow in the cold silence. The walls seemed to close in, shadows twisting in corners where no light reached. The faint, distorted calls of my friends floated through the air, pulling me deeper into the building's heart. Suddenly, a sharp noise, a metallic clang, broke the stillness. I froze. Then, from behind a cracked door, a whisper, "Help me." It was soft, desperate, and unmistakably familiar. The scent of burnt plastic grew stronger, curling around me like smoke. I had to find them. Whatever this place was, it wasn't done with us yet. The clang still echoed in my ears as I leaned against the cracked door frame, my fingers pressed flat against the peeling paint. "Help me." The whisper was faint, but it lingered in my mind, a needle threading through every thought. I stepped inside. The room was empty except for a rusted metal bed frame and a cracked window that barely let in the dull glow of the hallway's emergency lights. The walls were a sickly yellow, stained with what looked like years of neglect and something darker in places. The floor tiles were cracked, some missing altogether, revealing the cold concrete beneath. I crouched down, running my hand over the rough plaster, feeling the grit rub off onto my skin. There was nothing else, no sign of who had spoken. No footprints. No discarded belongings. Just silence. Except for the faint hum of something electronic, barely audible but definitely there. A low, steady buzz that didn't belong to the old hospital's ancient wiring. My hands trembled, but I forced myself up and scanned the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay again. Then I noticed it, a small black box tucked behind the radiator. The kind of thing you'd miss if you blinked. It looked like a speaker, maybe a little Bluetooth device, but with wires fraying out from one side. The burnt plastic smell came from it. I pulled it out carefully. The wires still had a faint warmth, like it had been running recently. My fingers brushed a button, and suddenly a distorted voice crackled out, saying, "Hey, it's me. Come here." My breath caught. The voice was unmistakable, Jesse. My friend. But the sound was warped, mechanical, like someone had fed his voice through a bad text-to-speech app. I dropped the device onto the floor. "No," I whispered. "This can't be real." But it was. I sat down with my back against the wall, heart hammering. Whoever was doing this was using technology to imitate my friends. To lure people in. To trap them. I wanted to run, to get out, but my legs wouldn't listen. The hospital corridor outside was empty again. The lights flickered faster, shadows jumping like restless ghosts. But no ghosts were here. Only a person. Someone who wanted to trap me. I needed to find out more. I needed to understand how deep this went. The next day, I went back during visiting hours, pretending to be a volunteer. The receptionist barely looked up as I slipped past, my ID badge hanging crookedly around my neck. The place smelled different in the daylight, less oppressive, but no less eerie. The buzz of distant machines and faint chatter from the nurse's station filled the air. I headed straight for the ward where I'd heard the voices. The layout was a labyrinth. Narrow halls branching off into smaller corridors, each lined with doors that opened into sterile, empty rooms. The walls were yellowed, peeling in places, and the fluorescent lights buzzed mercilessly overhead. I kept my phone out, recording as I moved, hoping to catch something, anything that could explain what was happening. Halfway down the hall, I passed a nurse pushing a cart. She glanced at me, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't place recognition. Concern? "Can I help you?" she asked, voice soft but firm. I forced a smile. Just looking around. New volunteer. She nodded slowly, then glanced over her shoulder. "Be careful in this wing. Some rooms, they get quiet in the wrong way. Like the building itself doesn't want you there." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She shook her head. "Just old hospital stories. Patients disappearing. Voices in empty rooms. You know how rumors go." I thanked her and kept walking, but her words stayed with me. Disappearing patients. Voices. The same things I'd heard. I stopped outside room 217, the same number where I'd found the speaker. The door was slightly ajar, creaking with a draft. I pushed it open slowly. Inside, the faint hum was louder. I crouched and looked under the bed. There was another device, this one newer, sleeker, like a smartphone connected to a small amplifier. I picked it up, fingers trembling. A message flashed on the screen, "Come closer. We miss you." Cold sweat broke out on my neck. I couldn't tell if I was terrified or furious. Then, from the hallway, I heard a voice clear and unmistakable, calling my name. "Alex. Alex." It wasn't Jesse this time. It was Mia. I froze, heart pounding. The voice was perfect, soft and real, like she was standing right outside the door. Alex, please. I wanted to answer, to call back, but a part of me screamed to run, to get out. I glanced around, desperate for an escape route, but the corridor seemed to have shifted. The walls looked longer, the doors farther apart. The hospital was a maze, and it was trapping me. I stepped back into the hallway, the voice fading into a whisper. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from an unknown number. Stop looking. You're next. My skin prickled. A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't alone. Someone was watching. And they knew I was onto them. I shoved the devices into my bag, heart racing as I hurried away from the ward. The lights flickered violently, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed to crawl along the walls. Every step echoed in the empty halls, but no one answered my calls. Outside, the hospital's automatic doors slid shut behind me with a hollow thud. The night stretched out, cold and indifferent. I needed help. But who could I trust when the voices I heard only led me deeper into the dark? And what if the person behind it was already inside my head? The hospital had secrets. Terrible secrets. And I was just beginning to uncover them. The hospital's automatic doors slammed shut behind me with a hollow thud, and I stood frozen for a moment, the cold night air biting at my skin. My phone buzzed again. The screen lit up. Stop looking. You're next. I swallowed hard. The words weren't just a threat anymore, they were a warning. But from whom? The hospital, the labyrinth where shadows thickened? Or the person behind the messages, the one using those synthetic voices to lure people into silence? I shoved my hands into my coat pockets and started walking down the cracked sidewalk. The night smelled faintly of rain and something else, stale antiseptic mixed with decaying leaves. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, sharp and lonely. I wanted to convince myself it was just a stray, but it sounded like a warning too. I kept thinking about those voices, my friends, calling me from empty rooms. I knew they weren't real. The tech behind it, voice synthesis software, was getting better every day. But who had the time, the obsession, to set up this elaborate trap? I had to know. The next morning, I woke up with my head pounding and the stale taste of hospital cafeteria coffee still lingering on my tongue. My phone was dead, no missed calls, no new texts. That felt like a small mercy. But the images of the endless corridors, the flickering lights, and the echo of my friends' voices calling from nowhere clung to me like a shadow. I found myself back at the hospital before noon, drawn by a mix of dread and determination. The front desk was deserted, the nurse's station cold and empty as if the place had been abandoned. I ducked past the reception and slipped into the ward where I'd first heard the voices. The hallway stretched out, longer than I remembered, the walls peeling in places, exposing rough plaster that scraped my fingers as I brushed against it. Fluorescent lights overhead buzzed erratically, flickering in a maddening rhythm that made my skin crawl. I hesitated outside one of the rooms, the one where I'd heard Sarah calling my name. The door was cracked open, and inside the stale air smelled of disinfectant and something metallic, like old blood. My throat tightened. "Sarah?" I whispered, stepping inside. Silence. Complete silence. I scanned the room. Empty bed, a rusted floor stand, a cracked window letting in weak daylight. The floor was littered with crumpled papers, patient charts, scribbled notes, and some printouts with strange symbols and lines of code. I picked one up, fingers trembling. It was a printout from some kind of voice synthesis program, the kind used in speech therapy or assistive technology. Someone had been using it here. Had been using it to fake my friends' voices. A cold realization slammed into me. This wasn't random. It was planned. Calculated. I dropped the papers and turned to leave, but the door in front of me slammed shut with a sudden, sickening bang. My heart jumped into my throat. I grabbed the doorknob and twisted hard, but it wouldn't budge. A voice crackled from the intercom mounted high on the wall, distorted, mechanical but unmistakably human. "Don't try to leave," it said. "You're part of it now." My hand shook as I pressed my ear to the speaker. The voice continued, calm, almost amused. "You think you can outsmart me? This hospital is my playground. Every corridor, every room, it's a cage. And you're inside it." A cold sweat broke out along my spine. I pulled at the door again, harder this time, but it was no use. The lock had been engaged from the outside. I backed away, heart hammering, scanning the room for another exit. But there was none. No windows that opened, no hidden panels. Just four walls closing in. The voice came again, softer now. "You heard the others, didn't you? Their voices? They're not lost. They're waiting. Waiting for you to join them." I swallowed hard, a dry lump lodged in my throat. I thought of Sarah, Mark, Lisa, the friends I'd heard calling. Were they trapped here too? Or worse? My phone buzzed again, still no signal, but the screen lit up with a new message. "You can't leave. Not anymore." I sank to the floor, the cold linoleum seeping through my coat. Panic clawed at my chest, but beneath it, a stubborn ember of resolve flared. I wasn't going to become another ghost in this place. Not without a fight. I pulled out the printouts, scanning the code again. This had to be a key, a clue. Maybe a way to track the source of those voices, to find the person behind this twisted game. But time was running out. The lights flickered violently, casting long, grotesque shadows that seemed to twist and dance on the walls like puppets in a cruel show. My breath came in ragged gasps. There was a presence here, just beyond sight, watching me. I ran my fingers over the cracked plaster near the door, feeling the rough edges. If I couldn't open the door, maybe I could find a way out somewhere else. A sudden noise made me whip around, a soft tapping, like fingernails against glass, coming from the window. I peered out. The hospital courtyard was empty, bathed in gray light. No one there. The tapping stopped. I was alone. Or maybe not. I realized then that I hadn't heard the voices in a while. The silence was deeper now, heavier, like the calm before a storm. Then, from the intercom, the voice returned, colder and sharper. "Welcome to the maze. You'll find it's easy to get lost when no one's listening." I clenched my fists, knuckles white. Every instinct screamed at me to give up, to sink into the cold floor and let the darkness swallow me whole. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Because whatever this was, whoever was behind it, they had already crossed a line. And so had I. The door clicked. The lock disengaged. I stood, heart still pounding wildly, and pushed it open. What waited beyond was darker than any room. The maze had just begun. The lock clicked behind me, the sound sharp and final like a judge's gavel. The hallway stretched and twisted ahead, a crooked spine of peeling paint and dust. The walls felt too close, like they were pressing in on me, and the silence was so absolute it roared in my ears. No footsteps. No voices. Even the distant hum of the hospital's ventilation system seemed to have died, leaving only my breath and heartbeat as reckoning. I slid my hand along the wall, fingers brushing over decades-old grime, the plaster rough and flaky under my skin. I should have been able to see the end of the corridor. Instead, it disappeared into a smudge of shadows, the way a photograph fades at the edges. I took a step forward. Then another. My shoes squeaked softly on the floor, the sound oddly loud in the void. Then the voice came. Not a whisper, not a murmur, but clear and insistent. Hey! Over here! It was Sarah's voice. My Sarah. The one who'd been missing for weeks. The one I heard calling me from empty rooms before. I froze. The hairs on my neck prickled, and my hands trembled despite myself. Sarah? I said, my voice cracking. Where are you? The voice came again, a little closer this time, but still impossible to place. This way. Hurry. I swallowed the lump in my throat and turned left, the corridor bending like a question mark. The air grew colder. It smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic, like old blood. The lights flickered, then went out, plunging me into near darkness. I fumbled for my phone, the screen illuminating the narrow path ahead in a weak circle of blue light. The hallway split again, two identical doors cracked open on either side. The voice came from the right. Don't be scared. I'm here. I stepped inside, the door creaking against the wall. The room was small, a forgotten patient's chamber with a rusted bed frame and a cracked window stained with grime. The voice was gone. The silence slammed back with a vengeance. I closed my eyes and listened. Nothing but the distant drip of water and the faint buzz of electricity somewhere deep in the hospital's bowels. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. That was when I saw it, a small speaker, hidden beneath the bed, its wires tangled like veins disappearing into the wall. A cold wave of realization hit me. The voice wasn't Sarah's. It was a recording, synthesized and manipulated. Someone had rigged this room with speakers, using technology to mimic my friends' voices, to draw me deeper into the labyrinth. I backed out slowly, heart thrumming, and the lights flickered back on. The hallway was empty again. No signs of Sarah, no footprints, no warmth. Just silence. Complete silence. I pushed on, each step heavier than the last. The hospital corridors began to feel less like concrete and more like a trap. I passed room after room, identical and vacant, but each one fitted with some kind of device, hidden speakers, motion sensors, cameras. Whoever was behind this wasn't just playing tricks. They were watching, controlling, orchestrating every move. Why? The words slipped out before I could stop it. Why trap people here? To what end? Then the voice came again, whispering from the intercom high above. Because no one listens. Not really. I froze. The voice was colder now, void of any warmth, like a machine reciting a script. But beneath the synthetic timbre, I sensed a cruel human intention, someone who had turned isolation into a tool. I pressed my back to the wall, heart pounding so loud I thought it might betray me. The corridors twisted and folded, the hospital's layout turning against me. I couldn't tell left from right anymore. Every door looked the same, every shadow threatened to swallow me. And then footsteps. Not mine. Slow. Measured. Echoing around the bend. I held my breath, the metallic taste of fear thick on my tongue. Who's there? I called, voice shaking. No answer. Just the footsteps, growing louder, closer. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing the floor would open beneath me, that the walls would collapse and swallow me whole. Then a voice, this one different, deeper, layered with an edge I couldn't place. Lost? I turned sharply, phone raised like a shield, but saw only a flicker of movement disappearing around a corner. The footsteps faded, replaced by a low, mechanical hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor. I forced my legs to move, chasing after the shadow, following the sound. The hospital's maze swallowed me whole. The next room I entered was colder, darker, the air thick with dust and a faint coppery smell. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my chest. My breath hitched. My hands pressed against the door, searching for a latch or handle. Nothing. I was trapped. The voice returned, distant but clear, playing over the hidden speakers. Welcome to your new home. I sank to the floor, back against the door, fingers trembling. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing heavier with each passing second. I thought of my friends, their voices stolen and twisted to lure me here. I thought of the person who had set this cruel stage, pulling strings from the shadows. Who were they? What did they want? The silence pressed down harder than ever before. My mind raced, searching for a way out, a crack in the facade. Then, just as hopelessness threatened to consume me, a faint sound. A soft tapping, like fingernails against glass. Except this time, it wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from inside the wall. And I wasn't alone. The silence stretched long after the tapping stopped. Trapped. That word echoed louder than the slam of the door. I didn't know how long I'd been there. Minutes? Hours? Time blurred in the stale air. I tried the door again, no give. No latch. No hope. Then the voice returned. Not friendly this time. Not coaxing. Cold and clipped, mechanical even, but still unmistakably human behind the mask. You won't be leaving. It came from the speakers again, the same ones I'd heard in the empty rooms, those twisted voices of my friends stolen, manipulated, weaponized. The ones that had drawn me in. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor, legs pulled close to my chest. My hands trembled, fingers tracing the rough edges of the peeling paint. The walls pressed in tighter. I closed my eyes, trying to steady a mind that was fracturing into sharp, frozen pieces. That's when I heard it again. The tapping. Soft. Persistent. Inside the wall. I pressed my palm flat against the cold surface. The sound came in waves, tap, tap, tap. Like Morse code, maybe. But what could it mean? Was someone on the other side? Or was it just another trick, another layer of this cruel game? The hospital's history came back to me, abandoned wings, forgotten patients, stories buried in paperwork nobody read anymore. No one had expected a place like this to be alive with something so sinister, so human, so utterly twisted. The patient, the one behind all this, must have known every inch of this labyrinth. Exploiting the technology to trap people where no one could hear them. The thought made my stomach twist. I remembered how I found the tablet earlier, the device running speech synthesis software, copying voices, manipulating tones, crafting lies. Whoever had set it up was brilliant and broken all at once. Then the tapping stopped. Silence. Complete silence. I forced myself up, knees stiff and aching. The air was colder now, the shadows deeper. I ran my fingers over the wall, searching for weakness. A panel? A crack? Something. My hand caught on a small ridge. A loose vent cover, rusted at the edges but not fully sealed. I pried it open, the metal scraping against my nails, making a harsh, grating sound that seemed to echo endlessly in the confined space. Inside, a narrow tunnel, dark and impossibly cramped. A thin beam of light from my phone's flashlight cut into the darkness. I could see wires coiled inside, tangled and frayed. The tapping sound must have come from here, but how? A person? A machine? Hello? My voice was hoarse, but steady. Is someone there? No answer. Just the faint hiss of the ventilation system and the distant, muffled sounds of the hospital beyond these walls. I hesitated. Leaning closer, I could feel the chill seeping through the vent. The air smelled stale, but beneath it another scent. Something human. Sweat. Fear? Hope? I slipped my phone through the opening, the light scanning deeper into the tunnel, but the beam vanished into blackness. The vent was too narrow for me to enter. I was alone on this side. Memories of my friends flooded back, how their voices had twisted into this trap, how they must have fallen for it just like I almost did. I swallowed hard, the weight of their silence pressing down on me. I didn't know if they were alive, or even still here. I sat back against the door, exhaustion crashing over me like a wave. My hands no longer trembled, but they felt cold and numb. I closed my eyes, listening to the emptiness. It was broken only by my ragged breathing and the distant, irregular hum of the hospital's night shift. The next morning, when the staff finally found me, I was still sitting there. Pale, trembling, and exhausted. The door was forced open, no ceremony, just a harsh push that pulled me back into the world. The nurse's face was a mixture of shock and relief. I could see questions in her eyes, but I couldn't speak. Not yet. They told me later the investigation, the police, the tech experts, how the patient had rigged the hospital's communication system with old and new tools, blending speech synthesis with hacked speakers hidden behind walls. The patient, a man named Lyle, had been admitted years ago, quiet, brilliant, obsessed with voices. He disappeared months before the hospital shut down the wing. No one knew what happened to him, but now it was clear. He had built his own prison, trapping victims in the empty corridors, luring them with voices they recognized. The hospital closed permanently after that. No more whispers. No more trapped cries. But I didn't leave the place behind. I carried it with me. The way the voices felt like fingers curling around my mind, pulling me in. The way I doubted my own senses, my own memories. The way the silence sometimes still pressed against my skin, thick and suffocating. I spent weeks in therapy, trying to untangle the mess of fear and guilt and relief. My friends, some were found, others never were. Their voices had been used and discarded. It broke something in me, knowing I'd survived because I'd been more stubborn or luckier or just slower to respond. I stopped answering my phone for a while. I stopped trusting the familiar. I even avoided hospitals, the sterile smell twisting in my stomach. I'd lie awake at night, hearing echoes of their voices, soft, distant, impossible to place. But I learned to live with it. To hold the tread without letting it swallow me whole. Sometimes I'd think about Lyle, the man who had turned technology into a trap. Was he still out there somewhere? Broken, brilliant, dangerous? Did he realize what he'd done? Did he care? I don't know. But I do know this, the human mind can be a labyrinth far more terrifying than any building. And sometimes, the voices we trust most are the ones that lead us into darkness. I'm still listening. Still cautious. Still trying to find a way back to normal. Not because I think I'll ever truly escape, but because I have to try. For them. For me. For the silence that still waits just beyond the walls. Story 4, Alder Hollow Presence, Haunted Wilderness Unearthed. I never thought a place that looked so empty could feel so crowded. The campsite was tucked into a fold of forest that seemed to swallow light whole. Pines stretched tall, their needles whispering secrets to the wind, while the ground beneath was carpeted with thick moss and brittle leaves. I'd been driving for hours, following a map I'd found online, the kind of backcountry spot that promised quiet and solitude. The kind of place where you could forget about the world. At least, that was the idea. I pulled off the gravel road onto a narrow dirt track that felt more like a suggestion than a path. The tires crunched over loose stones, the old sedan shuddering with every dip and rut. The sun was low, casting long fingers of orange through the trees, and the air smelled like pine sap and damp earth. I opened the window just a crack, letting the breeze slip in with its cool, woodsy scent. I could taste it on my tongue, like fresh rain. By the time I reached the clearing where I planned to set up camp, the sky had turned a shade of bruised purple. The last rays of sunlight glinted off a small, scratched metal sign nailed to a crooked post. It said, "Welcome to Alder Hollow." I hadn't heard of it before, but that was the point. No cell service, no crowds. Just me, my pack, and the wilderness. I parked beside a fire ring circled by stones, the ground flattened from years of use. A few scattered logs served as benches, worn smooth by countless campers. I pulled my gear from the trunk, a tent, sleeping bag, some food. The usual. My hands moved with practiced ease, though my fingers trembled a little from the day's drive. I wasn't in a hurry. The slow, deliberate rhythm of setting up camp was part of the ritual. A kind of meditation. As I hammered in the tent stakes, the forest around me settled into a heavy silence. No birdsong. No rustling animals. Just the faint crackle of distant branches under the weight of gravity. I paused, listening. The silence pressed in, thick and expectant, like the moment before a storm. It made my skin crawl, though I couldn't say why. I told myself it was nothing. Just the deep woods doing its thing. Inside the tent, I sat cross-legged, unpacking a small journal and a pen. I liked to write when I was alone. The steady scratch of ink against paper was a comfort, a tether to normalcy. Tonight, I scribbled about the drive, the colors of the trees, the way the air tasted like something old and untouched. Then I heard it. A rustle. Just beyond the edge of the clearing. Sharp, deliberate. Not the random noise of a deer or a squirrel. Something heavier moved through the underbrush. I froze, breath shallow, eyes straining in the dimming light. The forest seemed to lean closer, waiting. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer. Only the soft scrape of leaves. I grabbed the flashlight from my pack and clicked it on, the beam slicing through the darkness. The light caught on a patch of disturbed earth, broken twigs, and a set of footprints. They were large, the kind you might expect from a man wearing heavy boots. I swallowed hard, heart fluttering in a way I didn't like. The footprints circled the clearing, stopping just short of the fire ring. Whoever or whatever had made them had been watching. Watching me. I told myself it was probably another camper, maybe someone who'd slipped in after me. But I could find no sign of any other vehicle. No tire tracks on the road. The dirt trail I'd driven in on looked untouched, as if erased. Curious and uneasy, I stepped out of the tent, the cool air biting at my skin. The forest swallowed the flashlight beam quickly, and the shadows seemed to shift where the light didn't reach. I scanned the perimeter, ears straining for sound, but only silence answered. I tried the road again. The path I'd taken to get here. But it was gone. Not just overgrown or faint, but deliberately obscured. Branches had been snapped off and woven back into thick barricades. The dirt was smoothed over, erased marks that made no sense for a normal trail. It was as if someone had rewritten the landscape while I wasn't looking. A tight knot formed in my stomach. I turned back toward the clearing, but the familiar markers, the gnarled pine with the broken branch, the moss-covered rock shaped like a slumped bear, were gone, too. In their place, nothing but unbroken wilderness. I swallowed. The wind shifted. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, sharp and distant. I felt the weight of eyes, human eyes, pressed against the edges of the forest, just beyond the reach of the light. A presence. Not imagined. I wanted to tell myself it was just a trick of the mind, that the isolation was playing games with me. But my hands trembled, and my throat felt dry and tight. I moved back to the tent, locking the zipper with a click that sounded louder than it should have. I pulled the sleeping bag over my knees and tried to steady my breath. I kept thinking about the footprints, about the way the trail had been erased, about the silence that wasn't natural, about the feeling that I wasn't alone in Alder Hollow. Then I heard it again, the softest snap of a twig just outside the clearing, near the line of trees. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I waited. For what? I wasn't sure. But the forest had already started to change, and I wasn't sure I was ready to see what came next. The snap of the twig didn't come again. Eventually, the forest went still again, but the weight of those eyes, the watcher, didn't lift. I kept my flashlight close, its beam slicing through the dark whenever I dared peek outside. The clearing looked empty. But the emptiness was wrong. It felt staged, like a set for a play I wasn't supposed to be in. Morning came like a slow pill. The sunlight was pale and filtered through the thick canopy, casting long shadows that didn't help my nerves. I lay in the sleeping bag longer than I should have, staring at the tent ceiling, trying to piece together what I'd stumbled into. The footprints. The erased trail. The dog's bark. The snap. None of it made sense, and that made me restless. I finally zipped open the tent and stepped out, the chill air biting at my skin. The forest was quiet, too quiet. I scanned the edges of the clearing, looking for any sign of the paths I'd used to get here. Nothing. Where there should have been clear tracks, the ground was scuffed and muddied in a way that looked deliberate. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to hide their tracks. Or mine. I crouched to inspect the earth. The soil was turned over in irregular patterns, like someone had tried to cover a trail with haphazard brush and leaves. But the way it was done wasn't careless, it was methodical, almost surgical. Whoever did this wanted to make sure no one could follow. I glanced around, heart tightening. The idea crossed my mind that maybe I wasn't the first visitor here. Maybe others had come and gone, and some had never left. The thought made my skin crawl. I knew I had to figure out what was going on. But first, I needed a plan. I pulled out my notebook, the pages already smudged with dirt and moisture, and began jotting down everything I noticed, the footprints, the missing trail, the sounds. I wasn't sure if this would help, but writing sometimes made the chaos in my head feel manageable. Like I was still in control. Mid-morning, I decided to explore the perimeter of the clearing again, carefully marking trees with small strips of cloth torn from my shirt. If I got turned around, at least I'd have something to guide me back. The forest closed in quickly, the trees thick and gnarled, their branches knotted like arthritic fingers. As I pushed deeper, the underbrush thickened, snagging my pants and leaving tiny cuts on my arms. The air grew heavier, scented with moss and something faintly metallic. I stopped and sniffed, trying to place it. Blood? No, that wasn't right. Maybe rust from an old tin can or some abandoned gear hidden beneath the leaves. I kept moving, following my own marked trail, but every so often I'd glance back and find my cloth markers gone. One by one. No wind stirred, no animal passed through. They just disappeared. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd imagined taking them out, but the empty spots on the bark told a different story. The forest was playing tricks. Or someone was. A low, rhythmic thudding started then, distant but steady, like a heartbeat. I froze, turning in place. It wasn't the sound of any animal I knew. Maybe a woodpecker? But no, the rhythm was too mechanical. Too deliberate. I tried to pinpoint its source, but the trees swallowed the noise before I could. I swallowed hard, feeling the tight knot in my stomach grow heavier. I told myself to stay calm, to think clearly. But even as I tried, my lungs felt tight, my hands clammy. I retraced my steps back to the clearing, moving faster now. When I broke through the trees, I spotted something new and old, rusted metal can half buried near the edge of the clearing. Next to it lay a small bundle wrapped in plastic. Curiosity warred with caution. I knelt and carefully unfolded the plastic, revealing a crumpled, faded photograph. It showed a group of people, 5 or 6, smiling in front of a cabin that looked nothing like any building I'd seen here. The edges of the photo were torn, and someone had scribbled words on the back in shaky handwriting. I flipped it over, feeling a chill as I read, "We're not alone. Watch the shadows." I dropped the photo onto the dirt, heart pounding. I wasn't crazy. Someone else had been here, had felt the same eyes watching, the same creeping dread. Then I heard it again. The snap. Closer this time. Behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just the trees, silent and unmoving. "You're not going to scare me," I muttered, trying to sound braver than I felt. But inside, the knot twisted tighter. Back in the clearing, I noticed the ground near my tent had been disturbed again. Small footprints circled the area, barely there, but unmistakable, like someone was pacing, watching, waiting. I crouched, tracing one print with a trembling finger. Too small for a man, too large for a child, maybe a woman? Or someone wearing soft-soled shoes. The thought made me shiver. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, heart racing, but the screen showed nothing but a weak signal bar and a message from earlier that I hadn't seen. "Leave now." "They're here." I stared at the screen, the words blurring. I didn't know who sent it or why, but it was clear someone was watching, maybe even communicating. I stuffed the phone back in my pocket and scanned the tree line. The shadows seemed to shift, darker somehow, as if the forest itself was closing in. I realized then that this wasn't just a random encounter. It was a game. A hunt. And I was the prey. The wind picked up, rattling the leaves like whispered warnings. I gathered my gear, heart hammering, mind racing. I had to find a way out before the night fell again. But every direction looked the same. Every path seemed erased or blocked. The forest was a maze, and I had no map. I took a deep breath. I forced my legs to move. Somewhere, deep in the trees, I heard the dog bark again. Sharp. Insistent. I wasn't alone. And I never had been. The dog barked again, louder this time, sharp, urgent, echoing through the night like a warning I couldn't ignore. I pulled the phone back out, heart hammering so hard it nearly drowned out the night's other sounds. The screen was dim, the weak signal bar flickering nervously like a candle flame in the wind. The message was still there. "Leave now." They're here. No sender ID, no clue who they were. The words blurred as my eyes darted over the dark tree line, searching for movement, for any sign of human life or something worse. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, the plastic case cold against my palm. I needed to move. I had to find a way out. But the forest was a trap. Every trail I'd marked earlier was gone, erased as if swallowed by the woods themselves. No footprints, no broken branches, no signs of passage. Just endless, dark trees standing like silent sentinels, waiting. I swallowed hard. "Okay," I whispered to myself, voice cracking. Think. Think. I scanned the sky. The moon was a thin sliver, barely lighting the world around me, shadows pooling like ink beneath the trees. The air smelled damp and earthy, mixed with a faint tang of smoke, maybe from a distant campfire, or something burning nearby. Or maybe just my imagination, playing tricks. I wanted to believe it was nothing. But the bark came again, closer this time, sharper, more frantic. It made the hairs on my neck stand up. My gut twisted into tight knots. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, and that was the worst part. It could be in front of me, behind me, or circling, waiting for me to make a mistake. I took a step forward, the dry leaves crunching underfoot. My legs trembled. The forest seemed to respond, branches moved, shadows shifted. I blinked, and the path I thought I saw disappeared. I stopped dead, the cold pressing in from all sides. My breath hitched. Was I losing it? I wanted to call out, to say something to anyone. Hello? Is someone there? I'm lost. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the vast silence. No answer. I tried to retrace my steps, but it was useless. Every landmark I counted on was gone or altered. Trees I'd passed were replaced by empty spaces or thick underbrush. The ground beneath my feet was uneven, as if the earth itself had shifted to confuse me. I felt like a rat in a maze, blind and cornered. Then I noticed something new, a faint trail of broken twigs, almost too subtle to see. I crouched down, my fingers brushing the brittle branches. They weren't natural breaks. Someone had been here recently, moving carefully, deliberately. Or maybe it was a trap, designed to lure me somewhere. A dry snap echoed behind me. I whipped around, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. Nothing but darkness. Just the wind through the leaves and the distant bark, still circling, still urgent. I swallowed another lump of fear and forced myself forward, following the broken twigs. My throat was dry, my mouth tasted like ash. The air grew colder, sharper, as if the forest was breathing down my neck. I kept telling myself it was just a game, a sick, twisted game, but nothing supernatural. No ghosts. Just people. Watching. Waiting. And that was worse. I remembered the message on my phone. Leave now. Whoever sent it wasn't trying to help me. They were warning me because they knew something I didn't. Or maybe they wanted me to run into the trap. I couldn't tell which was scarier. The trail led me to a small clearing, barely wide enough for two people. Moonlight spilled over the rough ground, illuminating a circle of stones arranged carefully. Someone had been here. Someone was still here. The smell of damp earth and something metallic, blood, was faint but unmistakable. My hands trembled. I wanted to turn back, but the forest had other plans. I glanced around, desperate for an escape route. There was none. The trees closed in tighter, the underbrush thickening until it was almost impossible to move through. From the edge of the clearing, a voice broke the silence, low, calm, and chillingly familiar. You shouldn't have come here. I froze, every muscle taut. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the night like an item. I couldn't place it, but it was close. Too close. Who's there? I called, trying to keep my voice steady. Show yourself. The only answer was a soft rustle in the bushes, like someone stepping lightly on dry leaves. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the clearing. The air thickened, the smell of damp and metal growing stronger. I backed up, head spinning. The dog barked again, frantic now, almost pleading. I realized it wasn't just an animal. It was a warning system either for me or for whoever was out there. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, hands shaking. A new message flashed on the screen, no turning back. You're part of this now. I blinked, the words sinking in. Part of what? What was I part of? And why? The footsteps stopped. Silence. Complete silence. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward, a man, his face half hidden by a hood, eyes glinting in the moonlight. He smiled slowly, and that smile wasn't friendly. You should have left when you had the chance, he said, voice low and steady. But now, you belong here. With us. I wanted to run, to scream, to disappear into the night. But my legs wouldn't move. I was trapped. No paths. No trails. No way out. The forest had claimed me. And whatever this was, this game, this hunt, it was just beginning. The man's smile lingered in the darkness long after his words faded. I forced my legs to move, stepping backward without taking my eyes off the shadowed figure. The ground beneath me was slick with fallen leaves and mud, each step a squelch, a loud betrayal. My breath hitched, the night air tasted sharp, like metal and wet earth. I wanted to shout, to demand who they were, what this meant. But my voice caught in my throat, brittle and useless. Hey, I said finally, voice trembling but loud enough. Who are you? What do you want? The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward, the soft crunch of his boots barely breaking the stillness. Then, with a tilt of his head, the hood slipped back slightly, revealing a pale line of scar across his cheek. His eyes held something unreadable, calm, but cold. You're not the first, he said. And you won't be the last. I blinked, confusion knotting in my stomach. Not the first what? Not the first to get lost? Not the first to be hunted? I wanted to ask again, but the words tangled in my throat. Behind him, the dogs barking faltered, then stopped entirely. Silence swallowed the forest. The trees around us groaned softly, branches swaying in some invisible breeze. I could smell the faintest trace of smoke, something burning far off, but I couldn't tell what. Why are you doing this? I found my voice again. Why trap me here? What is this place? He shrugged, a slow, deliberate motion that made my skin crawl. We're just making sure the lost stay lost. The wilderness has a way of sorting people out, you know. Some belong, some don't. The words were vague, but the threat was clear. He wasn't just teasing or playing a game. This was something darker. Something calculated. I glanced around, desperate for any sign, any clue or road, a path, a marker. Nothing. The forest was a confusing maze, every trail blurred or erased, like someone had wiped the memory of the land clean. My heart hammered as I realized how truly isolated I was. Look, I said, trying to sound steady, I don't know what this is. But I'm not scared of you. Just let me go. His smile twisted, not quite reaching his eyes. That's the problem. You don't get to decide. A rustling sound to my left snapped my attention. My head jerked toward it just in time to see movement, a flash of pale skin disappearing behind a tree. Someone else. Or maybe more than one. The man's eyes flicked to the spot, then back to me. You see, you're surrounded. I swallowed hard again, taste bitter in my mouth. A dry, dusty smell was rising, old leaves, charred wood, something burnt but faint. My pulse quickened. I was trapped in a living nightmare. Wait, I said, voice rising. What do you want from me? Why don't you just take me somewhere safe? Or call someone? He scoffed softly. Safe? There's no safe here. Only the rules. and you broke them the moment you stepped off the trail. I bit my lip, trying to remember. Had I really? The forest looked the same everywhere. But that was the point, wasn't it? To confuse me, to disorient. The dog barked again, sharp and urgent, this time from behind the man. It sounded closer, like it was coming right toward me. I stepped back instinctively, tripping over a root and falling hard onto damp earth. The cold bit into my palms, and I tasted dirt. The man moved to block me, his presence a wall I couldn't get around. "Stay down," he said quietly. "It's better that way." But I wasn't going to stay down. Not yet. I scrambled backward, pushing myself up, eyes darting for anything to use as leverage. A fallen branch, a rock, a stick, anything. But the ground was bare except for leaves and mud. The dog barked again. Closer. Then the voice came, low and cold from the shadows beyond the man. "She's not ready." Another figure stepped forward, taller, broader, face hidden beneath a heavy hood. His voice was calm, deliberate, like a judge passing sentence. "Let her come to us. No need to rush." I swallowed. The forest felt like it was closing in, suffocating me. The first man nodded slowly, then stepped back, melting into the shadows. "For now." The dog barked once more, then fell silent. I was alone again. Except I wasn't. The air grew heavier, scent of cold dampness mixing with something else, something metallic, like old blood or rust. My skin prickled, goosebumps rising despite the warmth of the night. Every instinct screamed to move, but where? Every direction looked the same, dark, impenetrable, endless. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling, hoping for a signal. Nothing. Just the spinning wheel of doom, mocking me. The screen buzzed again. A new message. "No one leaves until we say." I dropped the phone, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The forest seemed to lean closer, alive with unseen eyes. I forced myself to stand, shaking. My mind raced. They knew everything. Every move. Every thought. Every desperate plan I tried to make. And me? I had nothing but my own breath and the cold night to keep me company. I took a hesitant step forward. Then another. The trees whispered secrets I didn't want to hear. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. Then the wind carried a faint sound, footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling. I stopped, held my breath, waiting. The darkness waited with me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, something bright, a flicker of movement just beyond the trees. A light. A small flame, maybe. Or a flashlight. Someone watching. Waiting. I rubbed my eyes, doubting my senses. But no. It was real. And it was coming closer. I swallowed the sudden dry lump in my throat and whispered to the night, "I'm not done yet." Because if this was a game, I was going to play. Even if it meant falling deeper into the dark. The night had stretched into something I hardly recognized anymore. It wasn't just dark, it was a thick, smothering absence that seemed to press against my skin, squeezing tighter with every breath. I remember sitting on the damp earth, my back against the rough bark of the old pine, listening. Not to the wind or the occasional snap of twigs from small creatures, but to the silence that felt too deliberate, like the forest was holding its breath. Watching. Waiting. I'd spent hours trying to piece together where I was, how I'd gotten trapped in this circle of shadowed trees and erased trails. The paths I'd marked yesterday with a line of stones and twigs had vanished, swallowed by the undergrowth or perhaps deliberately scattered. I wasn't sure anymore if the wilderness had turned against me, or if someone else had made sure I couldn't leave. It was that thought, the someone else, that twisted my gut and kept my hands trembling whenever I dared to check my surroundings. I tried calling out, my voice cracking, but it was swallowed up by the forest. I told myself to stay calm, to think clearly. I'd survived other rough patches before, but this was different. This was personal. I tried to recall every detail, the broken branches that looked like item, the faint footprints pressed into the mud near the stream, the odd smell of burnt pine needles that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just nature playing tricks. Someone had been here recently. Someone who didn't want me to leave. The air was cooler now, the chill settling deep in my bones. I pulled my jacket tighter, the rough fabric scratching my neck. I could taste the dryness in my mouth, the stale aftertaste of fear mixed with the faint scent of smoke. My eyes darted constantly, catching every flicker of movement in the peripheral shadows. A flickering light? No, just a reflection of my own campfire embers catching on a stray leaf. I kept telling myself it was nothing. It had to be. But then I heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching softly on the forest floor beyond the firelight. My breath caught, heart hammering like a drumbeat in my chest. Not animal footsteps. Too heavy, too steady. Human. Hello? My voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. Is someone there? Silence. Complete silence. The kind that gnaws at your mind, makes you question your senses. I wanted to stand, to run, but my legs felt rooted. The fire sputtered, sending shadows dancing wildly across the trees. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time warped here, like the forest was bending it around me. Then, a voice. Low, calm, almost casual. You shouldn't be here. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm just trying to leave. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle that didn't reach the eyes, I imagined. Doesn't work like that. Not once you know. I wanted to ask what that meant, but my mouth dried up. Instead, I looked toward the voice's source, seeing nothing but darkness. I could feel the gaze now, piercing, knowing. It wasn't a ghost or some supernatural force. It was a person. Someone who had been watching me all along. Who are you? I finally said, voice trembling. Just someone who's been around longer than you think, came the reply. This place. It keeps people. People like you wander in without knowing the rules. Rules? I thought I knew the forest. I'd hiked these woods before, but this was something else entirely. A trap disguised as wilderness, a maze with invisible walls. I stood, the firelight flickering over my face, making me look gaunt and wild-eyed. Why me? What do you want? Nothing personal. Just company. The voice softened, almost wistful. You walk in, and suddenly, I'm not alone anymore. It hit me then, this wasn't about a physical threat. It was psychological. The presence that had haunted me wasn't some shadowy monster. It was a person, lonely and wounded, using the forest to isolate and control. The erasure of trails was deliberate, a cruel form of imprisonment. I don't want to stay, I said, stepping back. I just want to go home. The voice sighed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. You'll leave when you understand. When you see why this place holds you. I shook my head, frustration boiling beneath the fear. I don't belong here. No one does, the voice said quietly. But some of us have nowhere else. The night felt heavier after that, the weight of unspoken stories pressing down on me. I realized the presence wasn't just watching, it was trying to communicate, to connect in a way that was desperate and broken. I sat back down by the fire, the crackling flames the only comfort in the suffocating dark. For hours, I listened to the forest's silence and the faint whispers carried on the wind. I thought about the person behind the voice, trapped by their own choices or circumstances, just as I had been trapped physically. Morning came slow, pale and gray. The forest looked less menacing in daylight, the shadows retreating to familiar shapes. I found the courage to stand and walk, choosing a direction by instinct rather than sight. The undergrowth still pressed in, but the trails had begun to reappear, faint, uneven, but real. I didn't know if the voice followed me or if it had finally let me go. Maybe it was the forest itself, finally releasing its hold, or maybe it was something within me that had changed. I wasn't the same person who had stumbled into the woods days ago. When I finally reached the edge of the trees, the familiar sounds of civilization greeted me: distant cars, birdsong, the rustle of early morning life. I collapsed onto the grass, exhausted and raw, the sun warm on my face. I thought of the voice one last time, a reminder that the wilderness isn't just physical. It's emotional, psychological, a place where loneliness and fear can trap you just as surely as broken trails and dense trees. I left the forest behind, but its presence stayed with me. Not as a threat, but a lesson. About isolation, about connection, about the unseen battles people carry. I'd come looking for escape and found a mirror instead. And maybe that was the real horror, the realization that sometimes the hardest thing to outrun isn't the darkness outside, but the one inside ourselves. Story 5, Silent Pines, haunting echoes of an abandoned camp. I had never been one for long hikes, but when the weekend rolled around and the city felt too loud, too full of sharp edges and buzzing screens, I needed to run. The campsite itself was unmarked on any map I carried, slipped between ragged ridges and a thick tangle of pines. I'd heard about it from some old forum threads, where people swapped stories about abandoned places nobody visited anymore. No cell service for miles. Perfect. Pulling the car up onto cracked asphalt, half overgrown with moss and grass, I stepped out and the smell hit me first: wood earth, pine sap, and something else, faint but unmistakable. Metallic. Like rust mixed with chemicals. I wrinkled my nose, glanced around. The sun was low, filtering through the branches in golden shafts, catching motes of dust in the still air. No birdsong. No wind. Just silence. Complete silence. That was the first thing that made my skin crawl. I tightened my jacket and started walking down the narrow path that led into the heart of the campsite. Broken tents sagged against rusted frames. Charred fire rings lay cold, scattered with shards of glass and bits of crumpled paper. I kicked a scrap aside and crouched to pick it up. A page, yellowed and brittle, covered in jagged handwriting. The words didn't make immediate sense. Scribbles, crossed out lines, frantic loops of ink. I shoved it into my pocket, heart ticking faster, not with fear exactly, but a strange mix of curiosity and quiet unease. Something wasn't right here. I kept walking, moving slowly between the empty cabins. One door hung off its hinges, creaking with the faintest breeze. Inside, the air was colder, damp with mildew. Old furniture leaned against peeling walls, and I noticed the faintest smell of ammonia, sharp and sour. It reminded me of hospital corridors, or something chemical and sterile. I stepped outside, blinking against the fading light. The forest around me seemed denser, darker. Shadows pulled beneath the trees, twisting strangely. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a flicker at the edge of my vision, but when I turned, nothing was there. Just the whisper of leaves. I told myself it was nothing. Probably a deer. Or a trick of the light. My mind, tired from the week, playing games. As I wandered, I stumbled across an old picnic table. On it lay a small, battered journal, its cover cracked and stained. The lock had long since rusted away. I flipped it open, fingers trembling despite myself. The first entry was dated 5 years ago. The handwriting was neat at first, almost clinical. It belonged to someone named Mark. He wrote about arriving at the campsite for a solo retreat to disconnect, to think. The kind of thing I'd tell myself before coming here. But as I read on, the tone shifted. Mark described strange noises at night, shadows that moved too deliberately, whispers carried on the wind. I paused, looking up. The woods seemed to close in tighter, the silence pressing against my ears. I could almost hear those whispers, as if the trees themselves were trying to speak. The next entries were worse. Mark's words grew erratic, full of paranoia. He wrote about things changing shape, reality bending. He mentioned a smell acrid, chemical that made his head swim and his thoughts slippery. Something leaking nearby, poisoning the air. I ran my hand through my hair, a cold sweat breaking out at my temples. This was just a journal, yes. A story. But it felt too vivid. Too real. I glanced around. The sun had dipped below the horizon by then, leaving the campsite drenched in twilight. The shadows no longer seemed like mere absence of light. They felt alive. Watching. I stuffed the journal into my backpack and decided to head back. My steps quickened, crunching over dry leaves and brittle twigs. The metallic smell was stronger now, almost choking. My chest tightened, breath coming in shallow bursts. Then, just as I reached the edge of the clearing, a soft sound stopped me. Footsteps. Not mine. Not human, but deliberate. A rhythm. Slow. Steady. I froze, heart pounding in a way that was too loud, too urgent. I told myself it was an animal, a deer or a fox. But the sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones was different. It was careful. Calculated. I couldn't see anything. No movement between the trees, just the cold press of darkness. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, hoping for a signal. Nothing. The screen glowed weakly, useless. I swallowed hard. Hello? I called, voice cracking. Is someone there? Only the wind answered, rustling dead leaves in soft waves. I told myself to stay calm. To breathe. To remember that this was just some abandoned campsite, and the stories were just stories. But as I took my first step back toward the car, the air shifted. The metallic scent grew sharp, bitter. My vision blurred momentarily, colors twisting at the edges. I blinked hard. Was I imagining it? Or had something just moved behind that line of pines? I kept walking, faster now, every nerve screaming to run, but my feet felt leaden. The woods whispered secrets I didn't want to hear, and the journal burned a hole in my bag, a reminder that this place held more than forgotten tents and broken glass. I don't know why I didn't turn back sooner. Maybe part of me wanted to find out what had happened to Mark. Or maybe I was already slipping, just like him. The forest waited, quiet and patient. And I was alone. The forest held its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I swallowed, dry and bitter, and took a hesitant step forward. Maybe I should have left. I knew that. But the pull to understand why those visitors had lost their minds, what this place really was, kept me rooted. I had to know. I found a fallen log nearby and sat down, knees pulled to my chest. My hands trembled as I pulled the journal out. The cover was cracked, the leather worn smooth by time and use. I flipped it open, the pages brittle, stained with smudges and something darker I couldn't identify. A faint smell of mildew and rust curled up from the paper. The first entry was dated only 6 months ago. A woman named Claire. Her handwriting was neat but shaky, the ink blotting in places. Day 3. The air still tastes strange, like metal and chemicals. I hear whispers when I close my eyes, but there's no one around. I don't trust my thoughts anymore. I think the others are watching me. I swallowed hard. The words echoed in my mind, the same paranoia I'd glimpsed in the scattered notes I'd found earlier. I flipped the page. Another entry from a man named Lucas described hearing voices calling his name from the woods. Maybe I'm losing it. Or maybe it's the place. The smell gets worse near the old leak. I can't sleep. I see things moving, shadows that dissolve when I blink. I trace the words with a finger. The leak. That had to be the source of the metallic stench. The chemical spill that local news had barely mentioned, buried under layers of official silence. I remembered the faded warning signs nailed to the trees, hazardous material, they said, but no one seemed to care. The journal slipped from my fingers for a moment. The wind picked up, rattling the dry leaves like a soft warning. I caught my breath, suddenly aware of how alone I was. The distant hoot of an owl, a twig snapping somewhere in the dark, small, ordinary sounds, but they felt like threats. I forced myself to keep reading. The entries became more disjointed, the handwriting erratic, words crossed out and overwritten. The writer's grip on reality loosened with every page. One described seeing figures lurking just beyond the trees, but when they turned, there was nothing there. Another claimed the forest itself was whispering, its voice a low, insidious hum that gnawed at her sanity. I closed the journal and pressed it to my chest. The stories weren't supernatural, they were heartbreakingly human. Fear twisting into madness. The chemical leak wasn't just poisoning the land, it was poisoning minds. A sudden rustle to my right made me jump. My breath caught in my throat. I spun toward the noise. Just branches brushing against each other, nothing more. But my skin prickled, and I shivered. The smell of metal was thicker here, bitter and invasive. I touched my neck. Sweat, cool against my clammy skin. I decided I needed to find the leak. If it was the key to all this madness, I had to see it with my own eyes. I pulled my flashlight from my pack and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, narrow and trembling. I stood, shaking off the chill, and started walking toward the direction the journal had indicated. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees leaning closer, their branches like gnarled fingers. The light flickered. I tapped it, willing it to stay steady. My footsteps were muffled by layers of dead leaves and pine needles, the crackle of twigs underfoot loud in the stillness. Halfway there, I stumbled over a moss-covered stone and caught myself on a tree trunk. I looked down and saw footprints. Not mine. Fresh. I froze, ears straining. No sounds but the wind and my own ragged breathing. I followed the prints cautiously. They led deeper into the thicket, toward the faint glow of something ahead. The smell hit me first, acrid, chemical, sharp enough to make my eyes water. Then I saw it, a shallow pool, oily and iridescent, shimmering under the flashlight beam. The water was stained a sickly greenish black. Dead leaves floated on the surface, curling and rotting slowly. The ground around it was cracked and dry, dirt stained with unnatural colors. I knelt beside the pool, the cold seeping through my jeans. My fingers hovered over the water but didn't touch. The journal had warned about contamination. I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked around. No signs of recent human activity. Or so I thought. Then I spotted it, a small, rusted metal canister half buried near the edge. I brushed dirt away carefully. The label was faded, but I could make out a few words. Toxic waste, do not disturb. That explained the leak. The forgotten remnants of some careless dumping, left to poison the earth and, apparently, the minds of anyone unlucky enough to stay here too long. I stood, feeling the weight of the discovery settle in my chest like a stone. If this leak was the reason people had gone mad, then I was in real trouble. The journal writers hadn't just been unlucky, they'd been poisoned. Slowly, insidiously. I turned back toward the campsite, the beam of my flashlight bouncing over gnarled roots and fallen branches. The forest seemed darker now, thicker. The trees whispered with the wind, voices tangled in the rustling leaves. A sudden movement caught my eye, a figure standing just beyond the tree line. I blinked, heart stuttering. It vanished before I could focus. I shook my head, willing myself not to imagine things. Maybe it was a deer. Maybe the shadows were playing tricks. But then I heard it, a soft, uneven breathing. Close. Too close. I spun around, flashlight beam darting wildly. Nothing. Silence. Complete silence. My breath came fast, shallow. The journal was right. The forest got inside your head. Made you question everything. But this was no ghost story. This was real. Dangerous. I had to get out. I had to warn someone. But as I turned to leave, the ground beneath me shifted. I stumbled, catching myself on mossy rock. The earth felt unstable, like it was giving way. And then, faint but unmistakable, a voice whispered my name. Don't go. I froze. The voice was hoarse, desperate. Human. Not a hallucination. Not the wind. Someone else was here. Alone was no longer an option. The voice lingered in the cold air, barely more than a rasp, but it snapped me out of my frozen state. Who's there? I called, voice cracked and uneven. No answer. Just the whisper of leaves and the distant, irregular drip of water somewhere deeper in the woods. I gripped the journal tighter, its worn cover rough against my palm, a lifeline I wasn't ready to let go of. I forced myself to keep walking, slow and deliberate, eyes darting to every shape that might be a threat or a person. The air tasted metallic, a faint chemical tang that I'd noticed creeping in since the moment I crossed the campsite boundary. It wasn't just the earth or the rotting wood, something else was here. Something toxic. I remembered the notes in the journals, how the leak had seeped into the soil, into the water, poisoning more than just the environment. People's minds, too. I tried to shake the memory off, but the rustling behind me grew louder, more deliberate. A snap, like a broken twig. I spun around, heart thudding so hard it nearly drowned out everything else, but again, there was nothing but the wind playing tricks. Or maybe me. Was I losing it already? The journals had warned about this. Paranoia, hallucinations, the slow erosion of reality. But I wasn't ready to accept that just yet. Show yourself, I said, voice steadier than I felt. Footsteps. Soft. Hesitant. Coming from the left, near a cluster of dead firs. I crept toward the sound, flashlight stabbing into the darkness. The beam caught a figure crouched on the forest floor, barely visible beneath a threadbare jacket, face obscured by a mop of tangled hair. The person looked up, eyes wide and wild, reflecting the light like a trapped animal. Please, the voice trembled. Don't leave me. Something broke inside me then. Not fear exactly, but a suffocating wave of something else, regret, maybe, or guilt. I knelt down slowly, holding out the journal like a peace offering. I'm not going anywhere, I said. Who are you? The figure hesitated, then reached out with trembling fingers, brushing the journal's cover as if it might burn them. You don't understand. It's the air, cold and heavy with silence. The water. It gets inside your head. Makes you see things, hear things. Makes you want to stay. I frowned. Stay? Why? They shook their head, voice barely a whisper. Because out there, a jerk of their chin toward the dense trees I'd come through, there's nothing. No one. No help. Only emptiness and the sickness. Here, at least, you're not alone. I glanced around, suddenly aware how silent the woods had become. No birdsong, no insects buzzing. Just that low, constant hum in the back of my mind, the chemical, I realized, mixing with my thoughts, warping them. The figure's eyes darted nervously. You don't know what you're up against. The others didn't. They left, tried to run. But the forest, it doesn't let go. Not really. The words sent a chill through me, colder than the damp air. I wanted to ask what happened to the others, but I couldn't make my voice work. Instead, I flipped open the journal and showed them the pages where the previous visitors' writings grew erratic, scribbled notes, crossed out words, desperate pleas. See this? I said. They all lost it. You're not alone in this. A flicker of recognition passed over their face. They were weak. I'm not like them. Something about their expression made me doubt that. How many days had they been out here? Weeks. The crime on their skin, the wildness in their eyes, this wasn't strength. It was survival, yes, but at a cost. I glanced down at the journal, then back at the figure. We need to get out. Together. They shook their heads so fast I thought they might fall over. No! There's no way out. The roads are blocked. The leak, they coughed, a harsh, rattling sound. It's everywhere. I felt a fresh wave of nausea. The chemical wasn't just leaking, it was spreading. And if this person was right, I was already trapped. The thought hit like a punch. I'd crossed a line. No turning back. We can find a way, I said, more to convince myself than them. The figure's eyes narrowed. You don't get it. Once you're in, you're in. The forest teaches you that. A sudden noise made us both whip around, a low thudding, rhythmic and uneven, coming from deeper in the woods. Not animal. Not mechanical. Something else. Did you hear that? I whispered. They nodded, standing slowly, eyes scanning the dark. You need to stop looking for answers out here. They'll find you first. Who? I asked, heart hammering. They hesitated, then backed away a few steps. People. Others. The ones who came before. The ones who stayed. My stomach tightened. You mean the campers from the journals? They nodded. They don't just disappear. They change. Become something else. Watchers, maybe. Waiting. I swallowed hard, the weight of it sinking in. This wasn't just a chemical leak. It was a trap for the mind, for the soul, whatever that meant now. The forest was a cage. The journals were warnings, but maybe they were also calls for help, or worse, traps themselves. I glanced at my watch. Hours had passed since I found the campsite. The sun was long gone, replaced by a dense blackness that seemed to press in from all sides. My flashlight flickered once, twice. Panic clawed at my throat. We need to move. Now, I said, voice tight. The figure nodded, but before we took a step, a faint light flickered between the trees ahead, brief, like a candle flame caught in a breeze. Then another. Then more, scattered like fireflies. Not good, the figure muttered. They're coming. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I wanted to run, to scream, to disappear into the night. But I was rooted, caught between the unknown in front and the uncertain safety behind. The journal felt heavier in my hands. My only link to the truth. And maybe my only hope. The flickering lights between the trees didn't waver, they multiplied, like a swarm of dying embers caught in a restless breeze. I gripped the journal tighter. Its pages felt damp, the edges curling with age and neglect. The faded ink almost seemed to swim before my eyes. A part of me wanted to tear it up, toss it into the underbrush and forget this whole nightmare. But I couldn't. I needed to understand what had happened here. Needed to know why the forest had turned into a cage, why the past visitors had lost themselves. We can't stay here. My voice was rough, swallowed by the thick darkness pressing in all around us. Those lights, they're not just wandering. They're watching. The figure nodded, but didn't move. I glanced at him. His face was hard to read in the weak beam of my flashlight, but his eyes held the same wary tension I felt clawing at my insides. We need to find shelter, he said quietly. Somewhere enclosed. Maybe a cabin or something. I didn't want to argue. The thought of barricading myself somewhere, away from whatever was out there, was a small comfort. Yet every step away from the campsite felt like peeling skin from a fresh wound, painful, raw, and terrifyingly exposed. The forest seemed to shift around us. Shadows stretched and recoiled. The chemical leak lingered invisibly in the air, a metallic tang that coated my tongue and made my throat itch. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the rising nausea. The journal's warnings echoed in my mind, distorted senses, creeping paranoia, the slow unraveling of reason. I thought I was prepared for all of it. I was wrong. We moved cautiously, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound besides our shallow breaths. The flickering lights danced ahead, sometimes close, sometimes vanishing behind thick trunks, only to reappear moments later. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder more times than I could count, heart hammering in my chest like a frantic drum. Do you think they're real? I whispered, barely daring to break the silence. The people from the journals, the ones who lost it. The figure's eyes narrowed. I don't know. But whatever's out here, it's not friendly. The words weren't reassuring. They were a cold admission of helplessness. I tried to focus, to steady my shaking hands as I flipped open the journal again. The entries were getting more fragmented, more frantic. The handwriting jagged, like the writer was clawing at sanity itself. One passage caught my eye. They watch from the shadows. I hear their voices whispering, laughing. But no one's there. It's the gas. It's the damn gas making me see things. I can't trust my eyes anymore. My stomach tightened. The gas. I could taste it, that sharp, metallic bitterness lingering in the back of my throat. It was a poison to the mind, invisible but deadly. Suddenly, a sharp crack shattered the tense quiet. Something moved just beyond the tree line, too quick, too deliberate to be an animal. I froze, breath caught in my throat. The figure beside me stepped forward, eyes scanning the darkness. Hello? His voice was low, cautious. Who's there? No answer. Just the rustling of leaves, a soft scuffing sound like footsteps retreating. I wanted to call out, to demand answers, but my mouth was dry. The journal slipped from my fingers, landing on the ground with a muted thud. We can't keep hiding, I said, voice trembling. We have to face it. Whatever's out here. The figure shook his head. Not yet. We need a plan. And we need to keep moving. A gust of wind whispered through the branches, carrying with it a faint, sour stench like rotten eggs mixed with chemicals. My head spun, dizziness creeping in at the edges of my vision. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady myself. When I opened them, the lights had converged into a single point, a dim glow flickering just beyond a thicket. It looked like a makeshift lantern, swinging gently on a thin wire. My pulse quickened. It had to be someone. Someone else still alive. Over there, I said, nodding toward the light. Maybe they can help. The figure hesitated, then nodded. Or maybe they're the ones we need to be afraid of. I felt the weight of the journal in my pocket, a silent reminder of what had come before. The previous visitors had lost their minds here, torn apart by fear and isolation. And now, I was walking straight into the same trap. We moved toward the light, every sense screaming in protest. The forest seemed to close in, the shadows deepening, the air thickening with that metallic taste and rotten stench. My hands trembled as I reached out and brushed aside a stray branch. The lantern swayed, revealing a small clearing. In the center stood a figure, a man, hunched and still, his face hidden beneath a dark hood. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just watched. "Hey," I called softly, stepping forward. "We're not here to hurt you." The man shifted. His head tilted slightly, and for a moment, I thought he might respond. Then he reached behind his back and pulled out a tattered journal, held it out toward me. I blinked. The same journal. My stomach lurched. This was impossible. "Where did you get that?" I whispered. He lifted his head just enough for me to see his eyes, wild, unfocused, pupils dilated like a trapped animal's. "They're all the same," he muttered. "All of us trapped in here. The forest, the gas, it's a prison. There's no way out." His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to run from this nightmare and find safety. But there was nowhere safe. The man's gaze snapped toward the trees, sharp and alert. "They're coming," he said. "And they don't like visitors." I glanced at the journal in my hand, the pages fluttering wildly in the breeze, smeared with dirt and desperation. The chemical leak wasn't just poisoning bodies. It was unraveling minds, twisting ordinary people into shadows of terror and madness. I looked back at the man, then to the flickering lights gathering beyond the clearing's edge. My breath hitched again. This time, the forest didn't just feel like a cage. It felt like a living thing, watching, waiting. And I was its prey. The man's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "They're coming," he said, eyes darting toward the edge of the clearing where the flickering lights danced like ghosts. My pulse hammered in my ears. I gripped the journal tighter, its pages damp with dirt and sweat, as if holding onto it might tether me to some shred of reality. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave this place, this nightmare that felt less like the woods and more like a trap set by some cruel, invisible hand. But the forest closed in, shadows deepening, the sickly sweet smell of chemicals thickening the air around us. There was no clear path, no safe direction. Just the unsettling rustle of leaves and a distant, low howl that didn't belong to any animal I knew. The man's ragged breathing broke the silence. "You don't understand," he whispered, voice cracking. "It's not just the gas. It's what it does to your head. It seeps in, claws at your thoughts, makes you see things, hear things, makes you doubt everything." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if he believed me or himself anymore. The journals I found told the same story, people who came here, their minds slipping away day by day. Paranoia gnawed at them until they were shadows, lost in a maze of their own unraveling senses. Why stay here? I asked, voice barely above a breath. Why not just leave? His laugh was bitter, hollow. Leave? Where? Out there, he gestured vaguely to the thick trees. It's poisoned. The air, the ground, even the water. You think I haven't tried? I've walked for miles, but it's like the forest won't let you go. Like it wants to keep you here, trapped in the madness. I swallowed hard, tasting the coppery tang of fear, or maybe the remnants of the tainted air. The journal slipped from my fingers, pages splaying open on the cracked earth. I crouched, gathering them, scanning the chaotic scrawl of the last entries. The words blurred: paranoia, hallucinations, voices that weren't there. The writer's grip on reality shattered beyond repair. Behind me, the flickering lights edged closer, a procession of figures emerging between the trees. They moved oddly, jerky, uncertain, as if the forest itself pulled at their limbs. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim, wild and unblinking. Not quite right. Not quite human. Panic flared, sharp and immediate. I stood, backing away slowly, keeping the journal clutched against my chest. The man's gaze locked on the approaching shapes, his body rigid with a tension that seemed to fracture the night itself. They don't want visitors, he said again. They want silence. They want us gone. The closest figure stopped, head tilting unnaturally. A shiver ran down my spine. My skin prickled, hair standing on end like static electricity. The air tasted sour, thick with the chemical's invisible poison, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. I took a step back. Then another. Wait, the man said suddenly. Don't run. That only makes it worse. They feed on fear. I blinked, uncertain. It sounded insane. But the way the figures hesitated, the way the silence stretched taut between us, there was a truth to it I couldn't deny. Then what? I asked, voice trembling. Stay calm. Show them you're not afraid. His eyes searched mine, desperate. They're not monsters. Not really. Just people, like us. Lost. I swallowed, forcing my breath steady. Tried to slow the frantic beat in my chest. The figures shifted, some stepping forward, others lingering on the edge, watching. I caught a glimpse of a face, pale, gaunt, eyes flickering with confusion and something darker. They looked like victims. The man's hand found mine, rough and trembling. We need to get out of here. Together. But slow. Quiet. I nodded, heart still hammering. The forest pressed in, the chemical smell a constant weight. But somehow, in that moment, I understood. The true horror wasn't just the poison in the air. It was the poison in the mind, the way it crushed hope, twisted trust, turned friends into threats. We moved, careful and deliberate, step by uncertain step. The figures watched but didn't follow. The flickering lights faded behind us, swallowed by the dark thicket. Hours later, after what felt like wandering through an endless maze of trees and shadows, we reached the edge of the contaminated zone. The air changed, cleaner, colder, sharper. I breathed deeply, the taste of fresh pine needles and damp earth grounding me. The man slumped against a tree, exhaustion dragging his body down. You made it, he whispered, voice raw. You're the first to come back sane. I looked at him, the journal still clutched in my hands, its pages a testament to the slow erosion of reason. Maybe, I said quietly. Or maybe I'm just the last one awake. Days later, back in the city, the world felt unreal. The noise, the crowds, even the sunlight seemed foreign after the suffocating grip of the forest. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from the shadows, the echo of whispers just beyond hearing. I tried to tell people about the campsite, the leak, the journals. But it sounded like a nightmare, a story spun from fear and isolation. Some nodded politely, others avoided my gaze. The authorities dismissed it as an old industrial accident site with no current danger. But I knew better. At night, when the city quieted, I'd hear the faintest rustle, the flicker of movement in the corner of my vision. Sometimes my own reflection seemed off, the eyes too wide, the smile too tight. The chemical's poison wasn't just in the forest. It lingered inside me, a slow, insidious rot. I started writing down everything, the memories, the sensations, the voices that sometimes broke through the noise. Not to prove anything. Not even sure who I was writing for. Maybe just to anchor myself, to hold on to the fragile thread of sanity. The journal I found at the campsite sits on my desk now, its pages yellowed and fragile. I read it sometimes, tracing the handwriting of those lost souls. Their stories are warnings, echoes of a place where the mind fractures and the forest waits. I don't know if I'll ever fully escape what happened there. The forest claimed a part of me, something I can't reclaim. But maybe that's the price of knowing. Trust me, I was there. The world is full of places like that, I think. Places where danger isn't loud or obvious. Where the real threat hides in silence, in the slow decay of trust and reason. I turned off the light and closed my eyes, the weight of the past pressing down. The forest was gone, but its shadow stretched long inside me. Silence. Complete silence. And somewhere deep inside, a whisper. Story 6, Ghost rigs on the empty highway, abandoned trucks in the pines. I was halfway through my usual route, the stretch of highway that most drivers avoid, not because it's dangerous in the usual sense, but because there's nothing out there. That morning, the sky was a dull gray, the kind that eats color. The air smelled damp, like something had rained overnight but never quite dried. I rolled down the window for a moment, letting the cool, earthy scent crawl inside the cab. Pine needles and wet leaves. It reminded me of a campsite I visited years ago. Somewhere I'd forgotten until that second. I've been driving rigs for almost a decade now, 32 years old, and I know this road like the back of my hand. It's a lonely stretch, sure, but it's routine. I keep my rig steady at 65, no rush. The highway hums beneath my tires, steady and predictable. I check the gauges again, oil, temperature, fuel all normal. The radio buzzed softly, static mostly. I didn't even bother flipping through the channels anymore. No signal. Not here. The woods on either side of the highway were dense, mostly pines mixed with the occasional birch or maple. I caught the slight movement of something just off the shoulder, a deer, probably. Then, a low bird call echoed somewhere. The kind you hear when the forest is waking up but hasn't quite opened its eyes. About 20 miles in, I saw it. Parked halfway off the shoulder, a big rig. Same make and model as mine, a white Freightliner, clean, no rust, no dents. The cab was empty. Doors closed. No trailer attached. Fresh tire tracks led off the highway, curving into the woods. I slowed down, pulled off the road a little, careful not to obstruct traffic, then realized there wasn't any. The rig looked too new to be abandoned, but no driver in sight. I squinted, trying to see inside the windows. No movement. No sign of anyone. I tapped the air, cold and heavy with silence horn twice, short blasts, polite enough to say, "Hey, you there?" No response. Nothing. I sat there a moment longer, the engine ticking down from idle. The smell of damp earth and pine thickened. I thought maybe the driver had stepped into the woods for a break. Maybe a call. but no cigarette smoke drifted in the air. No footsteps crunching on leaves. It didn't feel right. I shrugged it off and eased back onto the road, but I couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror. The rig stayed where it was, silent as a statue. A few miles down, I caught sight of another one. Same truck, same empty cab, same fresh tire tracks leading off into the woods. This time, I blinked, wondering if I'd imagined it. Two identical rigs, abandoned miles apart, on a stretch of road where you don't see much of anything at all. I pulled over again, this time more carefully. I grabbed my thermos, took a sip of lukewarm coffee. Bitter, like always. The taste stuck in my throat, and I coughed a little. What the hell was going on? I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe a company was moving rigs and had to leave a few behind. Maybe they broke down and the drivers left for help. But the tracks didn't add up. They were too fresh, and they led in the same direction. Into the woods. Away from the highway. I stared at those tire tracks, tracing them with my eyes as they disappeared under the thick canopy. Something about them looked deliberate. Like someone was guiding these trucks off the road on purpose. I shook my head. That wasn't my problem. I had a schedule to keep, a delivery to make. My rig was running fine, and I wasn't about to go chasing ghosts in the trees. Still, I took a quick look around. The woods felt too quiet. No birds chirping. No wind rustling the branches. Just silence. Complete silence. I got back in the cab and locked the door, just in case. My hands trembled slightly, or maybe it was the cold. I told myself to stay calm. I pulled back onto the highway, eyes scanning the tree line. The sky had thickened, the light fading faster than it should. I checked my watch. Early afternoon, but the shadows were stretching long. Then, just over the next rise, I saw it again. Another rig. Same model, same color, same empty cab. Fresh tracks leading from the road into the woods. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing. This wasn't a coincidence. Not anymore. I flicked on the hazards and slowed down, trying to see if anyone was nearby. No one. Not a soul. The woods seemed to lean in closer, the trees framing the highway like silent sentinels. I felt like I was being watched. Maybe I was. The engine of my rig hummed beneath me. The tires gripped the asphalt, steady and sure. But the highway wasn't feeling like home anymore. I kept driving, but my mind wouldn't let go. Who was parking these rigs? Why abandon them here, miles apart, with fresh tracks leading off-road? And what were they trying to hurt? Something about it all pressed against my skin, like a slow, creeping itch I couldn't scratch. I thought about turning back, about pulling off at the next exit, but the truth was, there wasn't one for miles. Just more woods, more empty road. I reached for the CB radio, flicked it on, hoping for a friendly voice. Static crackled. No luck. The highway stretched ahead, endless and empty. And I wasn't sure I wanted to find out what was waiting in those trees. The highway was empty, but the weight of those abandoned rigs kept pressing against my mind like stubborn fog. I glanced again at the empty stretch ahead. Fresh tire tracks leading off into the woods. Why? I kept replaying that image, the eerie precision of it, like someone was drawing invisible lines to hurt something or someone away from the asphalt. It was impossible to shake the feeling that I was being watched. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to push the anxiety aside. I'd been on the road long enough to know when my brain was just playing tricks. But this wasn't a trick. I pulled the rig over to the shoulder and killed the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab was thick, almost suffocating. My fingers drummed against the steering wheel, restless. I needed information, something concrete. I reached for the CB radio again, flipping the switch. Static crackled like dry leaves in wind. Nothing. No truckers, no dispatch, no friendly voices cutting through the static. Just the lonely hiss of empty airwaves. A low breeze stirred the trees, making the branches scrape against one another like dry bones. The smell of damp earth and pine hung heavy in the air, cold and heavy with silence. I could taste it, metallic, sharp, and oddly familiar. I leaned out the window, letting the chill wash over me. The headlights caught the outline of a narrow dirt path disappearing into the woods, the fresh tire tracks leading there exactly like the ones I'd seen around the other rigs. It was a perfect circle, or maybe a pattern only someone who knew this land well could draw. I thought about calling someone. Anyone. But cell service was dead here. A dead zone so complete it swallowed signals whole. I had no choice but to investigate this on my own. I grabbed my flashlight from the cab and stepped out, boots crunching over gravel and hardened mud. The beam cut a narrow swath through the dark, picking out the rough bark of trees and the tangled underbrush. The tire tracks were crisp, the mud still wet enough to leave prints. They disappeared into the forest, leading deeper than I dared to go. I hesitated. The woods were quiet except for the occasional snap of a twig. The air was thick with the smell of moss and something else, something faint and sour I couldn't identify. My breath came out in short puffs, mingling with the cold night. I thought about the rigs again, identical, abandoned, spaced out by miles. And those tracks, like someone had been herding trucks off the highway, guiding drivers into the dark. My phone buzzed suddenly in my pocket, a vibration that made me jump. I checked it, no signal bars, but a message had come through. Strange. I opened it. Stop looking. You're not safe. No sender. No number. Just those 4 words. A cold wave rolled through me, and I swallowed hard. Someone was watching. Or maybe more than one someone. I stuffed the phone back into my jacket, the screen's glow a small, cold pulse in the dark. I forced myself to walk a little further down the trail, flashlight scanning the trees. The tire tracks were fresh, but I couldn't hear anything else, no footsteps, no voices, no engines. My skin prickled. I kept telling myself it was just the wind, that the woods were playing tricks on me. But something about that message didn't sit right. Back by the rig, I spotted a small piece of paper pinned under a rock near the edge of the shoulder. It was folded, damp, edges frayed. I picked it up, flipping it open under the flashlight's beam. It was a crudely drawn map, highway lines marked with circles, and off-road trails leading into the woods. The same pattern the tire tracks made. At the bottom, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were the words, "They watch. They wait." My hands trembled. I shoved the note into my pocket and climbed back into the cab, locking the door behind me. The rig felt suddenly smaller, tighter, like a cage. I tried the CB one more time. Still static. I pulled out a notebook and scribbled down what I'd seen so far: rigs abandoned, tire tracks leading off the road, the strange map, the message on my phone. My mind kept circling back to the question, why? Why go through all this trouble just to herd trucks off the highway? I tried to remember if I'd noticed anything strange earlier, any other vehicles, people, signs. Nothing concrete. But I did recall a flicker of headlights a few miles back, too quick to catch properly, almost like a signal or a warning. My gut told me it was connected. The night stretched on, thick and heavy. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending dry leaves skittering across the pavement. I could have tried to sleep, but sleep didn't feel like an option. Not here. Not with the message in my pocket and the weight of those empty rigs drifting into my thoughts. I started the engine again, the grounding me. I needed to keep moving, keep gathering clues. But where? The highway stretched both ways, empty and cold. No exits. No gas stations. Just miles of wilderness and shadows. I pulled out the map from the glove compartment and overlaid the crude drawing I'd found. The circles matched the points where I'd seen the abandoned rigs. Someone was deliberately spacing them out, creating a perimeter. But why? What was the end game? I tapped the steering wheel, my fingers tracing the lines as if that could unlock the secret. Then I realized the tracks didn't just lead into the woods, they looped back toward the highway, like a twisted funnel. It wasn't just herding trucks off the road. It was trapping them. A sudden noise made me jerk upright. A branch snapped sharply to my right, close enough to make my heart jump. I swung the flashlight out the window, beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing but shadows and trees. I tried to convince myself it was a deer or a raccoon, but the sound had a deliberate rhythm to it. Not random. Controlled. I swallowed hard and pulled back onto the highway, engine roaring as I accelerated. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing just off the shoulder, watching me go. But when I glanced again, there was nothing but empty black. The night closed in around me, thick and endless. I was alone. For now. But I knew that wouldn't last. Something was out there, moving through those trees, waiting. And it wasn't going to let me go easily. The engine's hum was a thin thread of sound against the heavy silence that swallowed the highway. I tried to shake the cold sweat from my palms. The thought kept circling, relentless. The tracks didn't just lead into the woods, they looped back, funneling trucks off the road and trapping them. Like a snare. And I'd just driven right into it again, without even realizing. The highway stretched ahead, empty and unwelcoming. No cell signal. No way to call for help. Just miles of cracked asphalt and dense forest. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 2:07 a.m. The kind of hour where your mind starts playing tricks, turning shadows into shapes and silence into whispers. I kept driving, but the unease didn't fade. My eyes caught something ahead of a rig parked on the side, identical to the others. Fresh tire tracks loomed, leading off the road and into the trees. Same pattern. Same nightmare. Why here? Why now? And how many more were out there? Suddenly, the headlights caught a flash, a figure stepping out from the tree line just beyond the rig. I slammed the brakes, heart slamming against my ribs. The truck fishtailed slightly before steadying. The figure didn't move toward me, just stood there, shoulders hunched, watching. No words. No movement beyond that. I swallowed hard, voice rough when I finally spoke. Hey! You lost too? No answer. Just the rustle of leaves in a cold wind that had picked up, carrying the sharp scent of damp earth and pine. The figure's head tilted slightly, like it was listening. Then it stepped back, melting into the shadows. I rubbed my face, trying to steady my breath. This wasn't random anymore. Someone was out here, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The rigs. The tracks. The silence. It wasn't an accident. It was a trap, designed to herd drivers off the road and into the woods. And once you were in, there was no easy way out. I needed to know more. I had to understand the pattern, the reason. But every time I tried to focus, the weight of the night pressed down harder. The trees seemed to lean closer, the wind whispered secrets I couldn't grasp. I pulled alongside the abandoned rig, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The cab door was open, swinging gently in the breeze. Inside, the driver's seat was empty. The dashboard was untouched, no sign of struggle or haste. Just abandoned. I stepped inside, the cold metal floor pressing under my boots. The smell of stale coffee and faint cigarette smoke lingered. Papers scattered on the passenger seat, maps and notes scribbled in hurried handwriting. I grabbed one, scanning the words. Keep to the woods. Avoid the highway. They watched the road. My fingers trembled. Who was they? Who was watching? The thought scraped at the edges of my sanity. Then I noticed something else, a small, folded piece of paper tucked under the map. I unfolded it carefully. Don't trust the lights. Follow the tracks, but not too far. It circles back like a trap. Once inside, there's no way out unless they want you to leave. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. I looked back outside, the woods pressing close, dark and silent. The fresh tire tracks led in, sure. But the loop back toward the highway? That was the trap. A circle closing tighter with every step. I sat back, breath shallow. I was caught in the middle of something far larger than a few abandoned rigs or strange tire tracks. Someone or some group was deliberately herding drivers off the road. Trapping them. For what purpose? I didn't know yet. But I was running out of options. The highway behind me was empty, no signs of other vehicles. And the woods weren't just trees anymore, they were a maze, a cage. The night shifted. The wind picked up again, carrying a faint sound, a low murmur, like voices just beyond the tree line, too distant to make out. My skin prickled. The figure I'd seen moments ago wasn't alone. I closed the cab door slowly, heart thudding. I needed to move. Fast. But where? Back to the highway? The trap was there. Forward? Into the woods? The tracks beckoned, but I knew better now. The loop would bring me right back. Then, the headlights of another rig flickered in the distance, down the curve of the road. But it wasn't moving. Parked, just like the others. My pulse quickened. How many more were out there waiting? I started the engine, hesitated, then turned on the truck's CB radio. Static hissed, then a crackle. Anyone out there? This is Rig 47. Come in. Silence. Only static. Then a voice, low and distorted. You don't belong here. Turn back. I froze. The voice wasn't angry, just cold. Like a warning. Who is this? I demanded, swallowing the lump in my throat. No answer. Just a crackle of static and the faint sound of footsteps too close to the cab to be outside. I slammed the radio off and glanced in the rearview mirror. No one. The woods were still. The rig stood silent. The road ahead was a trap. The woods were a maze. And behind me, whoever or whatever was watching wasn't going to let me leave. I was past the point of no return. And I didn't know if I'd ever get out. My hands tightened on the wheel as the headlights flickered, casting fleeting shadows that danced between the trees. The truck's headlights sputtered once more, then steadied. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to exhale slowly. Okay, I muttered under my breath, trying to steady the tremor running down my spine. You want me to turn back? No way. I shifted the rig into gear, the tires crunching softly on the gravel shoulder as I edged forward, I starting between the rearview mirrors and the dark woods. A part of me wanted to believe it was just some prank, some local kids messing with truckers who dared to cross this godforsaken stretch of highway. But after seeing those rigs, identical and abandoned, and those tire tracks leading straight into the trees, I knew better. Someone out here was playing a cruel game. And I was the bait. I flicked the CB back on. Listen, whoever's out there, I'm not turning around. If you want me to leave, you'll have to come get me. The radio hissed, then a low, deliberate voice crackled through, unmistakably close. You think you're smart. You think you can outdrive the dark. It's not the road that's dangerous. It's what waits off it. My heart slammed against my ribs. What waits? Who's there? Show yourself. No reply. Just the faintest shuffle, like someone dragging boots through dry leaves, just beyond the edge of the headlights. I whipped my head toward the driver's side window and caught a glimpse of movement, a figure slipping behind a tree. Too quick to make out details, but definitely human. My breath hitched. The temperature dropped, or maybe it was just the sweat cooling on my skin. I slammed the radio off again. No use inviting conversation if it only led to more mind games. I wasn't going to let some shadow puppeteer lead me deeper into this nightmare. The rig idled, tires resting just shy of the white line marking the edge of the highway. I debated my next move. Turn around? Push forward? Neither felt safe. I glanced back one last time. The rig behind me, the one I'd caught on the edge of my vision earlier, was still there. Parked at an impossible angle, headlights off, engine cold. No driver. That's when the headlights flickered again. Not from the rigs, but from a pair of headlights approaching on the highway, far in the distance. I squinted, relief flooding me. Another trucker. Someone else stuck out here in the void. Maybe a chance for backup. The approaching rig slowed as it neared my parked cab, then came to a stop a couple of 100 feet away. The driver's door opened, and the faint sound of footsteps crossed the gravel. I climbed down from my cab, boots crunching on the cold dirt. The other trucker was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, wearing a faded baseball cap and a worn jacket. His face was lined, eyes sharp but tired. You rig 47? He asked, voice low but steady. Yeah, I said, still scanning the woods behind him. You've seen the rigs? The tracks? He nodded, pulling a pack of gum from his jacket pocket. Been here a while. Tried to make sense of it myself. They don't just park these rigs, it's a setup. Herding drivers off the highway. Into the woods. I swallowed hard. What for? He shrugged, chewing slowly. Don't know. But I've been watching. There's a pattern. Drivers get pulled in, then they disappear. Nobody finds them. His gaze flicked to the woods, where the darkness seemed to pulse. It's not just about scaring you off. It's something else. A sudden rustling from the trees made us both freeze. The man's eyes narrowed. Did you hear that? I nodded. My hands trembled despite the chill. Yeah. Something's out there. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a flashlight, switching it on. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating a narrow path veering off from the edge of the highway and into the woods. Fresh tire tracks led down that path, just like I'd seen before. Looks like the trail starts here, he said, voice grim. Why would someone want to lure drivers off the road? I asked, swallowing the lump in my throat. He shook his head. Maybe they want something from the woods. Or maybe they don't want anyone to pass through here. Either way, it's dangerous. A sudden snap echoed behind us, a branch breaking underfoot. We both spun around, flashlight slicing through the blackness. Nothing but the trees, swaying gently in the cold wind. "Stay close," the man said, stepping toward the path. "I'm going to check it out." "Wait," I said, panic rising. "We don't even know who or what is out there." He glanced back at me, face hard. "We don't have a choice. If we wait here, we're sitting ducks." I nodded, swallowing my fear. Together, we plunged into the woods, the beam of the flashlight bouncing wildly over roots and fallen leaves. The smell of damp earth and pine filled my nostrils, sharp and real. Every crackle of leaves beneath our boots sounded like a gunshot in the quiet. The path narrowed quickly, the trees closing in like a wall. I kept glancing behind us, catching fleeting shadows that didn't belong. My heart thundered, hands slick against the flashlight's grip. "Look," the man whispered, pointing ahead. A rig identical to the others sat half buried in the dirt, its tires sunk deep in mud, headlights dead. Fresh tire tracks led away from it, deeper into the woods. I stepped closer, feeling the cold bite of metal beneath my fingertips. The cab door was slightly ajar. "Someone's been here recently," I said, voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and died. Darkness swallowed us whole. "Damn," the man cursed softly, shaking the light. "Nothing." A soft voice whispered from the shadows, chilling in its calmness, "You shouldn't be here." My stomach twisted. I could see nothing but the faint outline of the man next to me, frozen. "Who's there?" the man demanded, voice steady but low. Silence. Then footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling us. I could feel eyes on me, cold and calculating. The woods seemed to close tighter, the night pressing in like a living thing. "We don't want trouble," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Just passing through." A slow, dry laugh echoed from the darkness. "No one passes through here." The man grabbed my arm, urgency sharp in his grip. "We need to get out of here. Now!" I nodded, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. We turned, stumbling back along the path, branches clawing at our faces and clothes. The whispering followed us, a low voice promising consequences for trespassers. As we reached the edge of the woods, the highway's faint glow ahead felt like salvation. But just as I stepped onto the gravel shoulder, a figure blocked the way, a silhouette too tall and still to be mistaken for a tree. The sun was just beginning to dip beneath the horizon when I finally caught sight of the last rig. It sat crooked, its cab tilted ever so slightly as if it had been parked there in a hurry. The fading light cast long shadows into the trees, turning the highway into a strip of dusk and half-truths. I pulled my truck off the road, the gravel crunching beneath the tires, and sat there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. The landscape was quiet, almost too quiet, but I could still make out the faint outline of fresh tire tracks leading from the rig's rear, disappearing into the woods like a dark invitation. I'd been chasing these rigs for hours, maybe more, and every time I thought I was close to understanding what was going on, the puzzle slipped further away. Each abandoned truck was identical, same model, same faded blue paint, same cracked windshield. And always, those tire tracks. They weren't random. Someone was guiding drivers off this stretch of highway, deliberately hurting them somewhere. I don't know why I kept following. Part of me wanted to quit, turn around, and pretend none of this ever happened. But something deeper, maybe stubbornness or fear, kept me moving. I told myself I had to know. The air smelled like damp pine and earth, cool now that the sun was gone. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, the beam slicing through the dark. The rig's door was unlocked, swinging open with a groan that echoed down the empty road behind me. Inside, the cab was empty, save for a half-empty coffee cup left on the dashboard. The smell of stale tobacco lingered, mixed with something faintly metallic, a hint of old grease, maybe, or something less easy to place. I leaned in, trying to see if there was anything useful, a clue. But the cab was barren except for a crumpled map folded up beneath the driver's seat. I pulled it out and unfolded it carefully. The map was of this region: roads, forest boundaries, a few towns marked in faded ink. Someone had drawn a line in red marker, zigzagging up the highway and into the woods. I could almost feel the finger that had traced it, guiding someone away from the open road. A noise startled me, a branch snapping somewhere to my left. My flashlight beam darted through the trees, catching a flicker of movement. A figure. I stiffened, heart jackhammering. I wanted to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure vanished before I could make sense of it. I shuffled back to the truck, locking the doors behind me. My hands trembled enough that I almost dropped the map. The realization hit me like a cold slap. Whoever was doing this was close. Too close. They'd been watching me, maybe even following. I was a rat in their maze. The radio crackled suddenly, a burst of static followed by a voice, low, clipped, urgent. "You're not supposed to be here," it said. I blinked, scanning the dashboard. My CB was on, but I hadn't touched it. The voice came again, softer this time, almost a whisper. "Turn back." I swallowed hard. The rational part of me told me to drive away, back the way I'd come, and never speak of this again. But the part that had chased those rigs, pieced together the pattern, refused to give up. I answered, my voice rough. "Who is this?" Silence. Then a crackle. "You don't know what you're dealing with. Leave now." The line went dead. I sat there, heart pounding, the weight of the night pressing in. I wasn't sure what I'd found or what I was about to find, but I knew one thing for sure. This was no accident, no random string of abandoned trucks. It was a game, and I was the target. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, the rig's taillights fading into the darkness behind me. I kept my eyes on the road, but I was watching the trees too, waiting for the next trap, the next sign. The miles ticked by slowly, each one a test of nerves. Then, just as I was beginning to think I might make it through, the headlights caught a figure standing at the edge of the road. A man, tall and still, wearing a jacket that blended into the night. He raised a hand in warning, or maybe a gesture to stop. I slowed, heart twisting. His face was hidden in shadow, but there was something about the way he stood, blocking the road, that made me pause. "What do you want?" I called out, voice steady but low. He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the woods, then down the road. The message was clear. Take the woods, or keep going. Either way, there was no easy choice. I glanced in the rearview mirror. No rigs behind me. No other cars. Just the empty road curling into darkness. I took a deep breath and made the decision. I turned off the highway, following the tire tracks that cut into the trees. The path was rough, the underbrush scratching at the truck's undercarriage. My tires sank into mud, and the cab smelled of wet earth and pine resin. It wasn't fast, but it was a way forward. After what felt like an eternity, the trees thinned, and I saw a small clearing up ahead. The moon had risen now, casting a silver glow over a cluster of buildings. Old, weathered cabins with peeling paint and windows boarded shut. The rigs were here, all lined up like sentinels. But this time, there were people. Not the shadowy figures from the road, but real men and women gathered around a makeshift fire. They didn't look hostile, more tired, wary. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a hesitant smile, approached me. "You made it," she said quietly. I felt the tension in my chest loosen just a bit. What is this place? She looked around, then back at me. A trap, yes. But also a refuge for those who got caught up in it. We've been stuck here, trying to figure out how to get out. Her words hit me with unexpected weight. I wasn't alone, not really. These people had been through the same hell, caught in the same strange net that the abandoned rigs were part of. We talked long into the night, sharing stories and piecing together what we knew. The rigs were bait, left by a group that wanted to control who passed through this remote stretch of highway. I won't say why they might have their reasons, but it wasn't something I could fight with force or threats. It was a game of patience and survival. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just wait here, trapped in the woods with these strangers. But I wasn't the same driver who had wandered onto this road days ago. Something inside me had shifted, fear had sharpened into something else, something colder, clearer. I said goodbye to the group, promising to come back if I could help.